There are places on Earth where navigation becomes a form of faith. The Nisqually Glacier descends the southern flank of Mount Rainier like a slow river of ancient ice, carving its path through volcanic rock that has stood for 500,000 years. At 14,410 feet, Mount Rainier dominates the Cascade Range, visible from Seattle on clear days, a permanent sentinel wrapped in glacial armor. The Nisqually has been studied longer than any glacier in North America. Scientists have measured its retreat and advance since 1857. They have mapped its crevasses, documented its meltwater, analyzed its ice cores for climate data spanning centuries. They know this glacier the way a surgeon knows anatomy. But in the summer of 1983, 3 members of a United States Geological Survey team discovered something that made them question what knowing actually meant. The team had been contracted to update elevation benchmarks along the glacier's western margin. Standard work. Daniel Kovacs led the survey crew, a geologist with 12 years of experience in alpine environments. With him were 2 technicians, Janet Morales and Stephen Wyatt. They carried standard equipment, theodolites, measuring chains, and Silva compasses, reliable instruments that had guided expeditions across every continent. On July 19th, they established a temporary base camp at approximately 6,800 feet, just below the glacier's main terminus. The day was clear. Visibility extended for miles. Kovacs noted in his field journal that conditions were ideal. They began their work at 8:30 in the morning. By 9:15, Morales noticed her compass behaving strangely. She was standing near a crevasse, approximately 40 feet deep, one of hundreds that scar the glacier's surface. The crevasse ran northeast to southwest, about 6 feet wide at its opening, narrowing as it descended into blue darkness. Morales had approached to within 10 feet of the edge when she glanced at her compass to confirm her bearing. The needle was pointing straight down. She tapped the instrument, shook it, held it level with the horizon. The needle remained fixed, straining toward the earth as if magnetized to something far below the ice. Morales called Kovacs over. He checked his own compass. Same result. Wyatt joined them, holding a backup compass they kept in the equipment cache. All 3 instruments behaved identically within a certain proximity to the crevasse. Outside that boundary, the compasses functioned normally, needles swinging north with absolute consistency. Inside, they abandoned cardinal directions entirely and pointed only downward. Kovacs marked the perimeter. It formed a nearly perfect circle, roughly 200 feet in diameter, centered on the crevasse. The effect was not gradual. Compasses worked flawlessly at the boundary's edge, then inverted completely within 2 steps of crossing an invisible threshold. They spent the next 6 hours conducting tests. They descended into the crevasse on ropes, compasses strapped to their chests. At 30 feet down, the needle still pointed toward the glacier's depths. They placed compasses on ledges of ice, suspended them from lines, even buried one in the snow at the circle's center. Every test confirmed the same phenomenon. The compasses were not malfunctioning. They were responding to something. Kovacs radioed Mount Rainier National Park headquarters that evening. He spoke to a ranger named Thomas Braddock, who recorded the conversation in a logbook that would later be cited in internal park documents. Kovacs described the anomaly in technical terms. He requested permission to remain on site for additional days to conduct measurements and to contact specialists in geomagnetic research. Braddock granted the extension but made no promises about specialists. The survey team remained on the Nisqually Glacier for 4 more days. They expanded their measurements, using equipment borrowed from a seismic monitoring station at Paradise, the park's main visitor hub 5 miles to the east. They found no corresponding geomagnetic disturbance in the area, no unusual readings on magnetometers, no electromagnetic interference. The compasses simply pointed down, and only within that specific radius. On July 24th, Kovacs filed a formal report with the USGS office in Vancouver, Washington. The report was 17 pages long, accompanied by photographs, hand-drawn maps, and technical appendices. It described the anomaly in detail and recommended immediate follow-up investigation by geophysicists specializing in magnetic field research. The response came 3 weeks later. A single-page letter thanked Kovacs for his thoroughness and noted that the matter had been forwarded to the appropriate department. No follow-up investigation was ever scheduled. Kovacs did not let the matter rest. He contacted colleagues at the University of Washington's Department of Earth and Space Sciences. A professor named Dr. Raymond Alcott expressed interest and planned a field expedition for the following summer. In May of 1984, Alcott submitted a research permit application to Mount Rainier National Park. The application was denied without explanation. Alcott tried again in 1985. Denied. In 1986, a different researcher, Dr. Lena Hartley from Oregon State University, applied for a permit to study geomagnetic anomalies in glacial environments without mentioning the Nisqually site specifically. Her application was approved. When she arrived at the park in August, a ranger informed her that the Nisqually Glacier had been temporarily closed to research activities due to increased crevasse instability. The closure lasted 8 months. By the time Hartley could legally access the area, her funding had expired. Meanwhile, hikers and mountaineers continued to visit the glacier. Some of them carried compasses. A few noticed the anomaly. Most dismissed it as instrument error or local interference from volcanic rock. But a pattern began to emerge in trip reports filed with ranger stations and in entries posted to climbing forums throughout the late 1980s. A climber named Marcus Liu wrote in a 1987 summit log that his compass went haywire near a crevasse on the Nisqually. He did not specify exact coordinates. A wilderness guide named Claire Osterman mentioned in a 1989 newsletter for the American Alpine Club that compasses were unreliable in certain sections of the glacier and recommended GPS units instead. In 1990, a Seattle-based journalist named Philip Darnell attempted to investigate. He interviewed Kovacs, who still had his original field notes. Darnell hiked to the glacier with his own compass and confirmed the phenomenon. He photographed the crevasse and the surrounding terrain. He prepared an article for a regional outdoors magazine. The article never ran. Darnell later told friends that his editor had received a call from someone identifying themselves as a National Park Service liaison, expressing concerns that the story could endanger public safety by encouraging inexperienced hikers to seek out the site. The editor killed the piece. Darnell kept his notes. In 2008, he posted them online. By then, the original coordinates Kovacs had recorded no longer appeared on any updated USGS topographic map of Mount Rainier. The maps showed the Nisqually Glacier in painstaking detail, every major crevasse field, every elevation contour, but the specific area Kovacs had marked was rendered as a smooth, featureless expanse of ice. Cartographers do not make such omissions by accident. Efforts to access the site have continued sporadically. In 2012, a group of graduate students from the University of British Columbia planned an unauthorized expedition. They were turned back by park rangers before reaching the glacier, cited for entering a closed research zone that did not appear on any public closure list. In 2016, a climber posted GPS coordinates on a mountaineering forum, claiming they matched Kovacs' original site. The post was removed within 18 hours. The user's account was deleted. The phenomenon itself has never been debunked. It has simply been ignored with a kind of institutional thoroughness that suggests intention rather than oversight. No peer-reviewed study has examined it. No geological survey has published findings. The National Park Service has issued no official statement. But the compasses still point downward. Guides who work on Mount Rainier will sometimes mention it quietly, off the record, usually late in the evening after clients have gone to sleep. They talk about the circle on the Nisqually, where navigation fails. Some of them have been there. Most avoid it now, not out of fear, but out of something closer to respect. As if the glacier is holding something it does not wish to release. Daniel Kovacs died in 2019. In his final interview, conducted by a researcher working on a book about unexplained geological phenomena, he was asked if he had any theories about what he encountered on the Nisqually Glacier. He paused for a long time before answering. "I think," he said, "that we were never supposed to measure that place. I think some questions are left unanswered on purpose. The crevasse remains, the circle remains, and somewhere beneath the ice, something continues to pull every compass needle toward the dark." Some sounds arrive before they are made. The disappointment cleaver is not a place that forgives mistakes. It rises along Mount Rainier's eastern flank, a narrow ridge of volcanic rock and ice that serves as the most popular climbing route to the summit. The route earns its name honestly. In 1895, a climbing party reached this prominent rock rib, only to discover it did not lead directly to the peak as they had hoped. The disappointment was geographic. What came later was something else entirely. The cleaver sits at approximately 12,300 feet, exposed to weather that can shift from calm to lethal within minutes. Climbers rope together here, moving in careful succession across slopes where a fall means pulling your entire team into the void. The air is thin, judgment becomes uncertain. Every decision carries weight that most people will never understand in their ordinary lives. Since the route was established, more than 10,000 climbers have passed over the cleaver. Most descend safely. Some do not. But between 1975 and 2003, 17 separate climbing parties recorded an identical phenomenon in summit journals, kept at Camp Muir and the ranger station at Paradise. They heard themselves speaking before the words left their mouths. The first documented account came from a climber named Robert Howell in June of 1975. Howell was guiding two clients to the summit, experienced mountaineers who had summited peaks in the Himalayas and the Andes. They departed Camp Muir at 1 in the morning, moving by headlamp through darkness that turned the mountain into an abstraction of shadow and snow. At approximately 5:30, as dawn spread across the eastern horizon, Howell's team crossed onto the cleaver proper. The wind had died. Conditions were stable. Howell walked second in the rope team. His clients spaced 15 feet ahead and behind. He heard his own voice shout a warning about a concealed crevasse. The voice was clear, unmistakable, carrying his exact cadence and the slight rasp he developed at altitude. It came from somewhere ahead on the route, perhaps 30 feet upslope. Howell stopped immediately, signaling his team to halt. He scanned the terrain with his headlamp, searching for the crevasse his voice had warned about. He found nothing. The route ahead appeared solid. Confused but cautious, Howell probed the snow with his ice axe, testing for hidden gaps. Still, nothing. He glanced back at his clients. Both stood motionless, waiting. Neither had called out. The mountain was silent, except for the crunch of their boots in the snow. Howell decided to continue. He took 3 steps forward, eyes fixed on the snow ahead, and then he saw it. A crevasse, concealed beneath a thin snow bridge, exactly where his voice had warned it would be. Howell stopped just short of the edge, close enough to feel the hollow sound of space beneath his feet. He turned to his clients and shouted a warning. The exact same warning he had heard 30 seconds earlier. Same words, same inflection, as if his voice had traveled backward through time to meet him on the route. Howell wrote about the incident in the Summit Journal at Camp Muir. His entry was brief, clinical, the kind of report a professional guide files when something unusual occurs but remains unexplained. He noted the time, the location, and the phenomenon. He did not speculate about causes. 6 other climbing parties reported similar experiences that summer. A mountaineer named Alicia Petrov heard herself calling coordinates to her partner 2 full minutes before she spoke them. The coordinates were precise, describing a rest point they had not yet reached. When she arrived at that exact location, she radioed the same coordinates without realizing she had already heard herself do so. In August, a team from Tacoma reported hearing overlapping voices from their own group, shouting instructions that would not be given for another 20 or 30 seconds. One climber, David Ortega, documented the experience in a personal journal later shared with researchers. He described the voices as clear and immediate, not distant or distorted like ordinary echoes. They came from the slope ahead, always ahead, as if sound itself was moving in reverse. The phenomenon occurred exclusively on the Disappointment Cleaver. Climbers on other routes, Emmons Glacier, Couts Ice Chute, Liberty Ridge, reported no such experiences. Only the Cleaver produced this temporal displacement of sound. By 1980, the accounts had become frequent enough that guides began mentioning them during pre-climb briefings. Not as warnings, exactly, more as context. A known oddity of the route, like the altitude or the weather. Some guides theorized that the rock formation of the Cleaver created unusual acoustic properties, perhaps reflecting sound in strange patterns. Others suggested the thin air and physical exhaustion caused auditory hallucinations. But the voices were too specific, too accurate. Climbers heard themselves warning about obstacles they had not yet encountered, shouting coordinates they had not yet reached, calling out names in situations that had not yet occurred. The voices were always predictive, always correct, and always contained information the climber did not consciously possess at the moment of hearing. A climbing instructor named Virginia Moss experienced the phenomenon in 1987 while guiding a training course. She heard her own voice shout for someone named Brian to tighten his crampon strap. Moss had 3 clients with her that day. None were named Brian. She continued climbing, puzzled but focused on the route. 15 minutes later, her team encountered another climbing party descending from the summit. One of the climbers introduced himself as Brian. His crampon strap had come loose. Moss watched him kneel in the snow to tighten it, and she heard herself call out the exact warning she had heard a quarter hour earlier. She did not mention this to Brian. She did not mention it to anyone until 2 years later, when a journalist named Sam Holloway began investigating the phenomenon for a feature story in a Pacific Northwest Outdoors magazine. Holloway interviewed 12 climbers who had experienced the temporal echoes. He reviewed summit journals dating back to 1975. He hiked the Disappointment Cleaver route 3 times, accompanied by guides who had heard their own voices on previous ascents. Holloway himself heard nothing unusual, but his recordings, made with audio equipment carried in his pack, contained something that troubled him deeply. On the playback, there were voices, not his voice, not the voices of his guides. Different voices, indistinct and layered, speaking words that could not be clearly understood but were undeniably present. The voices appeared on all 3 recordings, always in the same section of the route, always clustered around the 12,000-foot elevation mark. Holloway submitted his article to the magazine in March of 1990. The editor requested revisions, asking for more scientific explanation and less anecdotal evidence. Holloway spent another 6 months researching acoustic phenomena, consulting with physicists and audio engineers. He resubmitted in September. The magazine declined to publish. The editor provided no detailed explanation, only a brief note thanking Holloway for his work and stating that the piece did not align with the magazine's editorial direction. Holloway attempted to place the story elsewhere. Climbing journals, regional newspapers, outdoor recreation websites. Every submission was declined. In 2001, he self-published the article on a personal website. It remained online for 8 months before the hosting service removed it, citing a terms of service violation that was never specified. Meanwhile, the summit journals at Mount Rainier continued to collect accounts. Between 1990 and 2003, 11 more climbing parties documented experiences of hearing their own voices before speaking. The entries were consistent in their details. The phenomenon occurred on the Disappointment Cleaver, The voices were always the climber's own. The content was always predictive. Then, in 2004, the entries stopped. Not gradually, not with declining frequency. They simply ceased appearing in the journals. No climber reported the phenomenon after 2003. The last documented account came from a solo climber named Eric Jansen, who heard himself calling a warning about a collapsing snow cornice 3 minutes before the cornice actually collapsed. Jansen survived. He wrote about the experience in the Summit Journal at Camp Muir on October 7, 2003. After that, silence. Researchers who have attempted to investigate the phenomenon face a familiar pattern of obstruction. Requests to access historical summit journals are denied or delayed indefinitely. Park Service officials acknowledge the journals exist, but state they are being digitized and are not available for public review. The digitization project has been ongoing since 2007. A graduate student named Michael Trudeau filed a Freedom of Information Act request in 2012, seeking access to any internal park documents related to unusual acoustic phenomena on Mount Rainier. The request was denied on the grounds that the documents, if they existed, would fall under exemptions related to public safety. The Disappointment Cleaver remains one of the most heavily trafficked climbing routes in North America. Thousands ascend it every year. They rope together, move through darkness, cross the same slopes where others once heard themselves speaking from the future. And if any of them hear those voices now, they do not report it. The journals contain only weather observations, summit times, and the occasional note of gratitude for safe passage. But sound does not simply disappear. It travels, reflects, disperses into silence. And on certain mornings, when the wind dies and the light breaks over the cleaver, guides will sometimes pause mid-step, listening, not for echoes of what they have said, but for echoes of what they are about to say. Time moves forward, except when it doesn't. Camp Muir sits at 10,180 feet on Mount Rainier's southern shoulder, a cluster of stone shelters clinging to a wind-scoured saddle between the Cowlitz and Muir snowfields. Named after naturalist John Muir, who climbed this route in 1888, the camp serves as the primary staging point for summit attempts. Climbers sleep here in thin air and thinner silence, waiting for weather windows that mean the difference between success and survival. In 1995, the National Weather Service installed an automated meteorological station 50 yards west of the main shelter. The station was part of a broader initiative to improve forecast accuracy in alpine environments, where conditions could deteriorate from calm to catastrophic within hours. The equipment was standard: anemometer, barometer, thermometer, hygrometer, and a data logger that transmitted readings via radio link to a receiving station at Paradise, 5,000 feet below. For 3 years, the station performed flawlessly. It reported wind speed, temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure every 15 minutes. Forecasters used the data to issue climbing advisories that saved lives. Rangers consulted the readings before approving summit attempts. The station became an invisible infrastructure of safety, reliable and unremarkable. Then, in August of 1998, the data stopped making sense. A meteorologist named Dr. Patricia Veldman was the first to notice the discrepancy. She worked at the National Weather Service office in Seattle, analyzing mountain weather patterns for the Cascade Range. On August 14th, she was reviewing the previous week's data from Camp Muir when she observed something impossible. The station had reported a severe wind event, gusts exceeding 70 miles per hour on August 11th. But Veldman had climbers' reports from that date. The weather had been calm, clear skies, light winds, ideal conditions. Multiple parties had summited without incident. Veldman assumed a sensor malfunction. She flagged the data as erroneous and moved on. 3 days later, on August 14th, a storm system moved across Mount Rainier. Wind gusts exceeded 70 miles per hour. The barometric pressure, temperature, and humidity matched exactly what the station had reported on August 11th. 72 hours early, Veldman pulled the raw data logs. She compared forecasts against observed conditions. The pattern was unmistakable. Starting on August 10th, every reading from the Camp Muir station was arriving 72 hours ahead of the actual weather it described. The station was not malfunctioning. It was reporting the future with perfect accuracy. Veldman contacted her supervisor, a senior meteorologist named Edward Galloway. Galloway reviewed the data himself, cross-referencing it with observations from climbers, rangers, and other weather stations in the region. The correlation held. The Camp Muir station was providing forecasts that were not predictions, but precise descriptions of conditions that would occur exactly 3 days later. On August 18th, Galloway drove to Mount Rainier National Park. He met with the park's chief ranger, a man named Lloyd Fisher, and explained the situation. Fisher was skeptical. He suggested equipment failure, atmospheric anomalies, anything that fit within conventional explanation. Galloway showed him the data. 72 hours of future weather, documented and verifiable. Fisher authorized an immediate inspection of the station. 2 technicians from the National Weather Service, accompanied by a Park Service electronics specialist named Victor Amaro, hiked to Camp Muir on August 20th. The weather was clear. The station stood exactly where it had been installed 3 years earlier, its anemometer spinning in the wind, its solar panels angled toward the sunday. Everything appeared normal. The technicians opened the instrument housing. The internal clock was running backwards, not slowly, not irregularly, backwards. At the same rate a normal clock runs forward. The digital display showed time decrementing, second by second, moving into the past rather than the future. The technicians checked the power supply, the circuit boards, the firmware. They found no electrical fault, no corrupted code, no logical reason for the behavior. Amaro photographed the display. The image would later be included in an internal report that circulated briefly before being classified under a designation that prevented public release. The technicians attempted to access the data logs stored in the station's internal memory. The logs were empty, not corrupted, not fragmented, erased, with a thoroughness that suggested deliberate action rather than equipment failure. The technicians used forensic recovery tools designed to retrieve deleted files from solid-state storage. They found nothing. The memory had been wiped at a hardware level, a process that required expertise and intention. The station was still transmitting. Even as the technicians examined it, the radio link was sending data to Paradise. But the readings no longer matched any observable conditions. The station reported random numbers, nonsensical combinations of temperature and pressure that could not exist in Earth's atmosphere. Galloway ordered the station decommissioned. The technicians disconnected the power supply and removed the data logger. They transported the equipment back to Seattle for laboratory analysis. The analysis revealed nothing useful. Every component tested within normal parameters. The clock mechanism, when examined in isolation, functioned correctly. The firmware was intact, unaltered from its original programming. The hardware showed no signs of tampering, no evidence of external interference. But the data logs remained empty, and no one could explain why the clock had been running backwards. Word of the incident spread quietly through the meteorological community. A researcher at the University of Washington, Dr. Angela Ibarra, requested access to the raw data and the decommissioned equipment. Her request was denied by the National Weather Service on grounds that the equipment was part of an ongoing internal review. Ibarra filed a Freedom of Information Act request. The response came 6 months later, stating that records related to the Camp Muir station were exempt from disclosure under statutes pertaining to national security. The connection between a mountaintop weather station and national security was not explained. In 2000, a replacement station was installed at Camp Muir. It functioned normally, No temporal anomalies. No predictive data. Just standard meteorological readings, transmitted in real time, describing conditions as they occurred. The original station was never returned to service. According to documents obtained through a separate FOIA request, in 2009, the equipment was transferred to a research facility operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Boulder, Colorado. Inquiries sent to that facility went unanswered. Climbers who were at Camp Muir during the period when the station was reporting future weather have been interviewed informally over the years. Most remember nothing unusual. A few recall rangers, seeming unusually cautious about weather forecasts, triple-checking conditions before authorizing climbs. One guide, a woman named Teresa Blackwood, mentioned in a 2004 interview that she had noticed the station's clock display during a rest stop in August of 1998. She did not think much of it at the time, assuming the display was broken. But she remembered the numbers moving in the wrong direction. She remembered thinking it was a strange malfunction to see time running backwards. She did not report it to anyone. It seemed irrelevant. Veldman left the National Weather Service in 2002. She now works as a private meteorological consultant. In a rare interview conducted in 2015, she was asked about the Camp Muir incident. She chose her words carefully. "We rely on instruments to tell us about the world," she said. "We trust that they measure what is happening now. When an instrument starts measuring what hasn't happened yet, it suggests our understanding of now might be incomplete." She declined to elaborate. The camp remains. Climbers still sleep in the stone shelters, waking before dawn to begin their summit attempts. They check weather forecasts on their phones, transmitted from satellites and meteorological models that predict the future through mathematics and probability. None of those forecasts are ever as accurate as the ones that came from Camp Muir in August of 1998. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind dies and the stars press close to the mountain, rangers stationed at Camp Muir will glance at the spot where the original weather station stood. They do not talk about what it reported. They do not speculate about why it was removed. But they wonder, privately, if time on this mountain moves the way it does everywhere else. Or if, at 10,000 feet, the future is just another kind of weather passing through, already known, waiting to arrive. There are gaps in the world where people go but do not arrive. Paradise sits at 5,400 feet, on Mount Rainier's southern slope, a subalpine meadow named by Verinda Longmire in 1885, when she first saw wildflowers spreading across the valley in impossible profusion. The area has been a destination for over a century, drawing visitors who come to witness the mountain's scale and the meadows that bloom each summer in defiance of the glaciers looming above. Paradise is the most visited location in Mount Rainier National Park, accessible by road, marked by visitor centers, and maintained trails that wind through forests of subalpine fir and mountain hemlock. It is not a place where people expect to lose time, but on August 14, 2001, between the hours of 2:17 and 2:28 in the afternoon, something happened that no one can adequately explain. The event affected at least 43 individuals hiking various trails in the Paradise area. None of them knew each other. None of them were in visual contact. They were scattered across an approximate 3-mile radius, pursuing different routes at different elevations. What they shared was an 11-minute absence from recorded reality. The discovery came weeks later, during a routine data review conducted by a cartographer named Neil Brennan. Brennan worked for a private outdoor recreation company that produced digital trail maps based on user-submitted GPS tracks. Hikers uploaded their route data to the company's website, contributing to a crowdsourced database of trail conditions and navigation information. In early September, Brennan noticed an anomaly in multiple GPS files submitted from Mount Rainier. The tracks showed normal progression along trails, then sudden gaps, flat lines in the data, where coordinates simply stopped being recorded. After 11 minutes, the tracks resumed exactly where they should have been, as if the hikers had continued walking during the missing interval, but their devices had failed to record it. Brennan initially assumed the gaps were caused by technical failures. GPS units can lose satellite signals in certain terrain, under heavy tree cover, or during solar weather events. But the gaps were too uniform, too precise. 11 minutes, consistently, across 43 different devices from 4 different manufacturers. And the gaps all occurred at exactly the same time. Brennan cross-referenced the timestamps. Every affected GPS track showed the interruption beginning at 14:17 hours, 2:17 in the afternoon, and resuming at 14:28 hours. The probability of 43 independent GPS units failing simultaneously in the same location, then recovering in perfect synchronization, approached statistical impossibility. Brennan contacted the users who had submitted the affected files. He sent polite emails asking if they had experienced any equipment problems during their hikes on August 14th. Most did not respond. Those who did reported nothing unusual. Their GPS units had worked fine. No error messages, no battery failures, no interruptions they had noticed. A hiker named Karen Joberg replied with particular detail. She had been on the Skyline Trail that afternoon with her husband, Lars, and their 12-year-old daughter. They carried 2 GPS units, both high-end models used for backcountry navigation. Karen reviewed her saved tracks after receiving Brennan's email and confirmed the 11-minute gap, but she had no memory of anything going wrong. "We stopped for a snack around 2, she wrote, sat on a rock and ate trail mix. Then we kept going. Everything was normal." Brennan asked if she remembered what time they stopped. Karen checked her photos. She had taken a picture of her daughter at 2:14 and another at 2:32. The timestamps were embedded in the image files, verifiable and precise. 18 minutes between photos. 11 minutes missing from the GPS data. Brennan expanded his investigation. He reached out to hiking forums, posted queries on outdoor recreation message boards, and contacted the National Park Service to ask if any unusual events had been reported on August 14th. The Park Service had no record of incidents that day. Weather had been clear. No rescues, no injuries, no disturbances. But Brennan kept finding people who had been there. A solo backpacker named Marcus DeLuca had been hiking the Alta Vista Trail. His GPS showed the same 11-minute gap. When Brennan contacted him, DeLuca said he remembered feeling unusually tired that afternoon, despite having slept well the night before. He had sat down to rest around 2:15. When he checked his watch again, he felt refreshed, as if he had napped, though he was certain he had only closed his eyes for a moment. A group of 4 college students hiking the Glacier Vista Trail reported similar experiences. One of them, a woman named Jennifer Kowalski, mentioned in an email to Brennan that she had felt weirdly good after their rest break that day, energized, despite the altitude and the summer heat. The pattern repeated across multiple accounts. Hikers who had stopped to rest. A brief pause that felt shorter than it should have. A sense of restoration, as if sleep had occurred in a span of seconds. And always, the 11-minute gap. Brennan compiled his findings into a report and submitted it to the National Park Service in October of 2001. He included GPS data files, timestamps, witness statements, and a statistical analysis demonstrating the improbability of random equipment failure. He requested an investigation into possible electromagnetic interference or atmospheric conditions that might have affected GPS reception in the Paradise area on August 14th. The Park Service acknowledged receipt of the report. A ranger named Owen Gallagher was assigned to review it. Gallagher contacted Brennan in November and asked several clarifying questions about the data collection methods and the reliability of the GPS units involved. Brennan provided detailed answers, including manufacturer specifications and accuracy tolerances. Gallagher said he would consult with technical experts and follow up. No follow-up ever came. Brennan sent additional emails in December and again in January of 2002. The responses were polite but vague. The matter was under review. Appropriate personnel had been notified. No timeline could be provided for conclusions or findings. In March, Brennan filed a Freedom of Information Act request, seeking any internal documents related to GPS anomalies or electromagnetic disturbances at Mount Rainier National Park on August 14, 2001. The request was processed 6 months later. The Park Service released 3 pages of weather observation logs from that date, showing normal atmospheric conditions and no unusual solar activity. No mention of GPS failures. No reference to Brennan's report. Brennan contacted researchers at the University of Washington's Department of Earth and Space Sciences. A professor specializing in ionospheric physics, Dr. Harold Unger, reviewed the GPS data and found it genuinely perplexing. Ionospheric disturbances could disrupt GPS signals, but they would cause position errors, not synchronized gaps in recording. And such disturbances would have affected GPS users across a much wider area, not just a localized zone in Paradise. Dr. Unger had no explanation. He offered to write a paper on the phenomenon if Brennan could provide more data. Brennan agreed and began systematically contacting outdoor recreation companies, asking if they had received GPS tracks from Mount Rainier with temporal gaps. Most companies did not respond. 2 replied that they did not retain detailed user data beyond basic route information. One company, based in Portland, confirmed that they had noticed similar anomalies in files from the Paradise area, but had attributed them to user error or equipment defects. By 2004, Brennan had identified 71 GPS tracks, showing the same 11-minute gap on August 14, 2001. The number represented only those users who had uploaded their data to public databases. The actual number of affected individuals was likely much higher. Dr. Unger never wrote the paper. In 2005, he told Brennan that his department chair had discouraged him from pursuing the research, suggesting it was not a productive use of grant funding. Unger apologized and moved on to other projects. Brennan continued collecting data for another 3 years. He maintained a private database and a website documenting the phenomenon. The site attracted modest attention from hikers and GPS enthusiasts, but no mainstream media coverage and no institutional interest. In 2009, the website went offline. Brennan had stopped updating it a year earlier. Attempts to contact him through his business email bounced back as undeliverable. The GPS tracks still exist, archived in scattered databases across the internet. The 11-minute gaps remain visible to anyone who knows where to look and what to search for. But the people who experienced them have mostly moved on. Their memories of that August afternoon reduced to a vague sense that they rested, felt better, and continued hiking. None of them can say what happened during those 11 minutes. None of them are certain that anything happened at all. But the data suggests otherwise. 43 people at minimum were somewhere else for 11 minutes. Somewhere their GPS devices could not follow. Somewhere outside the grid of satellites and atomic clocks that track human movement across the surface of the Earth. And when they returned, if they ever truly left, they came back, rested, restored, as if those 11 minutes had given them something that normal time could not. The meadows at Paradise still bloom each summer. Hikers still walk the trails, carrying GPS devices that record every step, every turn, every pause. The data streams to satellites and servers, creating unbroken records of human presence in the wilderness. Except for those 11 minutes. Those remain missing, filed in databases that no longer exist, held in the memory of people who cannot quite remember why they felt so rested that day. And the mountain keeps its silence, the way mountains always do. Some images refuse to stay fixed. The Longmire area sits at 2,700 feet in the southwest corner of Mount Rainier National Park. established in 1899 as one of the first ranger stations in the newly created park. The complex includes historic buildings constructed by the Civilian Conservation Corps during the 1930s, a small museum, and an administrative office that houses decades of park records. Among those records are evidence lockers containing materials from search and rescue operations dating back to the 1960s incident reports, topographic maps marked with search grids, personal effects recovered from the wilderness, and photographs documenting both successful rescues and unsuccessful searches. In Box 73 of Evidence Locker B, there are 47 Polaroid photographs that should not exist in their current form. The photographs were taken during a 5-day search operation in October of 1979. 3 hikers, college students from Olympia, named Gregory Dalton, Michelle Ruiz, and Aaron Pembroke, had failed to return from a day hike on the Rampart Ridge Trail. They were reported missing on October 9th when they did not arrive at their scheduled pickup location. Park rangers initiated a search the following morning. The lead ranger was a man named Russell Taft, a 15-year veteran with extensive experience in alpine rescue operations. Taft organized search teams and established protocols that included photographic documentation of all search areas, evidence locations, and significant findings. This was standard procedure, designed to create a visual record that could be reviewed if the search needed to be resumed or if legal questions arose about the park's response. Taft carried a Polaroid SX-70 camera, a popular model that produced self-developing instant photographs. He took 47 pictures over the course of the search operation, each one carefully labeled with date, time, location, and relevant notes. The photographs showed search teams moving through forested terrain, areas where the missing hikers' footprints had been identified, and eventually, the site where 2 of the 3 hikers were found alive on October 13th. Gregory Dalton and Michelle Ruiz were located in a drainage gully approximately 2 miles off trail, dehydrated and hypothermic, but responsive. Aaron Pembroke was never found. The search continued for another week before being suspended due to early season snowfall that made further efforts dangerous and unlikely to succeed. Taft filed his incident report on October 22, 1979. The report included detailed narrative descriptions of the search operation, maps showing areas covered, and references to the photographic evidence stored in the evidence locker. The 47 Polaroids were placed in a manila envelope, sealed and archived according to Park Service protocols. They remained there, untouched, for 34 years. In 2013, a park historian named Dr. Vanessa Corhonen was conducting research for a book about search and rescue operations in national parks. She requested access to historical incident files from Mount Rainier, including the 1979 case involving the 3 missing hikers. Park administration granted her request, and Corhonen spent several weeks reviewing documents in the Longmire archive. When she opened the envelope containing Taft's photographs, she found images that did not match his incident report. The first photograph, labeled Day 1, 0847 hours, Trailhead Staging Area, showed 6 rangers standing beside 2 Park Service vehicles. According to Taft's report, there were 6 rangers at the staging area that morning, but the photograph showed 7 people. Corhonen counted them twice to be certain. 7 individuals, clearly visible, wearing ranger uniforms and search equipment. She compared the image to Taft's written notes. The notes described overcast conditions and light rain. The photograph showed clear skies and bright sunlight, casting sharp shadows on the ground. Corhonen continued through the envelope. Photograph after photograph contradicted the written documentation. A picture labeled Day 2, 1,320 hours, footprint evidence, showed a boot print in mud beneath what appeared to be afternoon light, but Taft's notes indicated the print was discovered during heavy cloud cover. Another image, labeled Day 3, 0615 hours, bivouac site, depicted a tent with condensation frozen on its exterior, suggesting temperatures well below freezing. Weather records from October 1979 showed overnight lows in the low 40s. The discrepancies were not subtle. They were fundamental contradictions between the documented conditions and the photographic evidence. Korhonen contacted park administration. She met with the chief ranger, a woman named Diana Fukuda, and presented her findings. Fukuda reviewed the photographs alongside the incident report. She agreed that the images did not match the written record, but suggested that Taft may have mislabeled some of the photographs or that the written notes contained errors. Korhonen pushed back. The contradictions were too numerous and too consistent to be clerical mistakes. And there was something else, something more disturbing. 3 of the photographs showed people who were not part of the search team. The images were labeled Day 4, 1,405 hours, Secondary Search Grid, and Day 5, 0920 hours, Ridge Overlook. They depicted individuals moving through the forest, distant but visible. The figures wore civilian clothing, not ranger uniforms. One appeared to be a young man with a backpack. Another was a woman in a bright jacket. Korhonen compared the figures to descriptions of the missing hikers. The young man resembled Aaron Pembroke, based on photographs provided by his family in 1979. The woman's jacket matched the description of what Michelle Ruiz had been wearing. But Michelle Ruiz had been found alive. And the photograph labeled Day 4, 1,405 hours was taken before the rescue at a location 3 miles from where Ruiz was eventually discovered. Fukuda suggested that the figures might be other hikers who happened to be in the area. Korhonen pointed out that the park had been closed to casual recreation during the search operation. No other hikers should have been present. The conversation ended without resolution. Fukuda said she would consult with archival specialists and potentially have the photographs examined by forensic experts to determine if they had been tampered with or mislabeled during storage. No examination ever took place. Korhonen attempted to contact Russell Taft, the ranger who had taken the photographs. Taft had retired from the Park Service in 1992 and was living in Tacoma. She called his listed phone number in November of 2013. A woman answered, identifying herself as Taft's daughter. She informed Korhonen that her father had passed away in 2009. Korhonen asked if Taft had kept any personal records from his time as a ranger. The daughter said he had maintained journals and photograph albums, but those materials had been donated to the Washington State Historical Society after his death. Korhonen visited the Historical Society in December. She requested access to Taft's donated materials. The archivist informed her that the collection had been withdrawn from public access in 2011 at the request of the National Park Service. The reason given was that the materials contained sensitive operational information. Korhonen filed a Freedom of Information Act request seeking copies of Taft's journals and any correspondence related to the withdrawal of his materials from the Historical Society. The request was partially granted in March of 2014. She received heavily redacted photocopies of 3 journal pages, none of which pertained to the 1979 search operation. She returned to Mount Rainier and requested permission to re-examine the 47 Polaroid photographs. Fukuda denied the request, stating that the photographs were part of an active internal review and could not be accessed by outside researchers until the review was complete. The review has been ongoing for 11 years. Gregory Dalton and Michelle Ruiz, the 2 hikers who survived the 1979 incident, were contacted by a journalist in 2016. The journalist, working on a story about unsolved disappearances in national parks, asked if they remembered anything unusual about their rescue. Dalton declined to comment. Ruiz responded briefly, stating that she had no clear memories of the days she spent lost in the wilderness. She described feeling disoriented and confused, with fragmented recollections that did not form a coherent timeline. When asked specifically about the photograph that appeared to show her in a location where she was not found, Ruiz said she could not explain it. "I don't know where I was," she wrote in an email. "I remember the cold. I remember being afraid, but I don't remember the forest looking the way it does in that picture." Aaron Pembroke remains missing. His family has never received closure. In 2019, his sister, a woman named Laura Pembroke, filed a petition with Mount Rainier National Park, requesting that the search be officially reopened using modern techniques such as ground-penetrating radar and aerial thermal imaging. The petition was denied on the grounds that the likelihood of recovery after 40 years was statistically negligible. The 47 photographs remain in Evidence Locker B at the Longmire Ranger Station. They are stored in the same manila envelope, sealed with the same evidence tape applied in 1979. The tape shows no signs of tampering, but the images inside have changed. Whether they changed all at once or gradually over decades, no one can say. Polaroid film is not supposed to alter after development. The chemical process that creates the image is irreversible, fixed within minutes of exposure. Yet these photographs show a different October than the one recorded in written reports, a different search than the one Russell Taft described. And in 3 frames, different people standing in the forest, looking toward the camera as if they knew someone would eventually see them there. The park does not discuss the photographs. Requests for access are quietly declined, and the search for Aaron Pembroke, officially suspended in October of 1979, continues in the only place it can. In images that should not change but do, showing a version of the mountain that exists somewhere beside the one we know. There are paths that do not want to be walked. The Wonderland Trail circles Mount Rainier in a 93-mile loop, passing through old-growth forests, alpine meadows, and glacial valleys. Constructed between 1915 and 1935, the trail serves as both a recreational route and a boundary marker, defining the relationship between wilderness and human passage. The National Park Service maintains the trail through seasonal crews who clear deadfall, repair erosion damage, and ensure that hikers can safely navigate the circuit from July through October when snow makes the higher elevations impassable. The northern section, running from Carbon River to Ipsut Creek, passes through some of the densest temperate rainforest in the lower 48 states. Western red cedar and Douglas fir grow to heights exceeding 200 feet, their canopies forming permanent twilight along the trail corridor. The area receives over 100 inches of rain annually, creating conditions where decomposition and growth occur in accelerated cycles. Dead trees fall, new saplings rise. The forest consumes itself and regenerates with a rhythm that has continued for millennia. But something else happens here during the 3rd week of September, something that trail maintenance records document with uncomfortable consistency. The pattern was first noted in 2006 by a seasonal trail crew supervisor named Keith Yamaguchi. Yamaguchi had been working Mount Rainier trails for 7 years and was familiar with the normal cycles of maintenance required in different sections. The northern corridor typically needed clearing twice per season, once in early July after snowmelt, and again in late August to address summer storm damage. In September of 2006, Yamaguchi led a crew to inspect the northern section before closing the trail for winter. They arrived on September 18th to find the trail completely blocked. Fallen trees lay across the path, at intervals of every 50 to 100 feet. Undergrowth salal, Oregon grape, and sword ferns had spread across sections that had been clear trail only 3 weeks earlier during their August maintenance run. Yamaguchi assumed a windstorm had brought down the timber. He checked weather records for the area. There had been no significant wind events in September. In fact, conditions had been unusually calm. The crew spent 2 days clearing the trail, removing 19 downed trees and cutting back vegetation that had encroached on the established corridor. They documented their work with photographs and GPS waypoints, standard procedure for maintenance operations. The trail was cleared and passable by September 20th. Yamaguchi returned on September 23rd to conduct a final inspection before winter closure. The trail was blocked again. 14 new trees had fallen across the cleared sections. Vegetation had regrown to the point of obscuring the trail surface in multiple locations. 4 days, 14 trees. Growth that should have taken months. Yamaguchi filed a detailed incident report with the park's trail maintenance office. He included photographs showing the same GPS-marked locations before and after the second clearing attempt. The visual evidence was unambiguous. The trail had closed itself. A supervisor named Douglas Merritt reviewed the report and visited the site personally in early October. By then, snow had begun accumulating at higher elevations, making access difficult. Merritt hiked the northern section and confirmed Yamaguchi's observations. The trail was impassable, choked with fallen timber and dense undergrowth. Merritt noted in his report that the downed trees showed no signs of storm damage. The breaks were clean, occurring at the base rather than mid-trunk, as if the trees had simply fallen over from their root systems without external force. He also observed that the vegetation encroachment appeared focused specifically on the trail corridor. The surrounding forest showed normal growth patterns for the season. The incident was classified as a maintenance anomaly and attributed to possible root rot in the forest stand combined with late-season plant growth responding to specific soil conditions. The following year, in September of 2007, the pattern repeated. Yamaguchi's crew cleared the northern section on September 14th. They returned on September 21st to find it impassable. Fallen trees, dense undergrowth, identical conditions to the previous year. The crew cleared it again. Within 72 hours, the trail was blocked. This time, Yamaguchi installed motion-activated trail cameras at 6 locations along the section. The cameras were designed to document wildlife activity, but would capture anything that moved through the camera's field of view. The cameras recorded nothing unusual. No storms, no visible treefall events. The footage showed the trail corridor, clear and open, in frame after frame. Then, in images time-stamped approximately 48 hours apart, the same views showed fallen timber and vegetation growth. The trees appeared between frames. The growth occurred between exposures, as if the forest was rearranging itself during the intervals when the cameras were not actively recording. Yamaguchi submitted the camera footage along with his maintenance reports. The materials were reviewed by park resource management staff, including a forest ecologist named Dr. Helena Vasquez. Dr. Vasquez examined the images and requested permission to conduct a botanical survey of the northern trail section. Her survey, completed in June of 2008, found no anomalies in soil composition, no evidence of disease or parasitic infestation, and no environmental factors that would explain accelerated plant growth or synchronized tree mortality. The forest was healthy. The trees that fell across the trail each September showed normal growth rings and no structural weakness that would predispose them to failure. Dr. Vasquez recommended long-term monitoring, but could offer no explanation for the observed phenomenon. The pattern continued. Every year, during the 3rd week of September, the northern section of the Wonderland Trail became impassable. Maintenance crews began scheduling clearing specifically for this period, treating it as an expected seasonal event rather than an anomaly. In 2011, a trail crew member named Simone Broussard suggested installing permanent barriers, fallen log sections, and dense brush that would prevent the regrowth from blocking the trail. The barriers were constructed in early September, placed strategically along the most affected areas. By September 24th, the barriers had been buried under new fallen timber and overgrowth. The trail was impassable. In 2014, park botanists attempted to clear the trail using herbicides to suppress vegetation growth. The chemicals were applied on September 10th, following all environmental protocols and regulations. The vegetation died back as expected. Within 2 weeks, new growth had emerged, denser than before. and the trail was closed. By 2016, the National Park Service quietly adjusted the Wonderland Trail closure schedule, officially closing the northern section for the season in early September rather than late October. The justification cited in public communications was increased maintenance requirements and seasonal accessibility challenges. Internal documents told a different story. Maintenance logs from 2006 through 2024 show consistent, identical patterns. Clearing efforts during the third week of September. Trail closure within 48 to 72 hours. Trees falling with no apparent cause. Vegetation regrowing at rates that contradict botanical science. And the phenomenon remains isolated to this specific section. Other parts of the Wonderland Trail experience normal maintenance cycles. Other trails in the park show expected patterns of seasonal growth and decay. Only the northern section, from Carbon River to Ipsut Creek, behaves as if the forest is actively reclaiming what was taken from it. Hikers who have attempted to traverse the section during the third week of September report similar experiences. A backpacker named Julian Fenstermacher tried to pass through in September of 2018, one day after a maintenance crew had cleared the route. He described the trail as barely recognizable even with GPS coordinates. Fallen logs appeared across sections he was certain had been clear moments before. He turned back after 3 hours, unable to make forward progress. A wilderness guide named Patricia Okonkwo led a group through the area in September of 2021, following what she believed to be a recently maintained trail. The group became disoriented when the path they were following simply ended, closed off by dense vegetation that Okonkwo insisted had not been there during her previous pass through the same area 2 hours earlier. None of these accounts have been officially investigated. They exist in trip reports, online forums, and personal journals, fragmentary evidence of a pattern that the park acknowledges through maintenance schedules but never explains. The Puyallup tribe, whose ancestral lands include the area around Mount Rainier, have oral histories describing the northern slopes as a place where boundaries shift. Elders have mentioned in recorded interviews that certain paths close themselves during specific seasons, a natural cycle respected by those who lived in harmony with the mountain. Whether the current phenomenon reflects those old patterns or something else entirely remains uncertain. The forest continues its work each September, patient and methodical, undoing human effort, with an efficiency that suggests intention. Maintenance crews still clear the trail. They do so knowing it will close again within days. They photograph the same fallen trees, cut the same encroaching vegetation, and file reports that accumulate in park archives with no expectation of resolution. The northern section of the Wonderland Trail remains on maps. It appears in guidebooks and trail descriptions. But for 3 weeks each September, it exists only as an idea, a path that cannot be walked, a corridor the forest refuses to maintain. And in the maintenance office at Longmire, workers mark their calendars each year, September 15th through September 30th. The dates when the trail closes itself, the dates when the forest takes back what it believes is owed. There are places where voices cannot travel. Mowich Lake sits in the northwestern corner of Mount Rainier National Park, at 4,900 feet elevation, accessible only by a gravel road that closes each winter when snow makes passage impossible. The lake formed in a glacial depression thousands of years ago, surrounded by subalpine forest and meadows that bloom with wildflowers each summer. The area remains relatively isolated compared to Paradise or Sunrise, the park's more popular destinations. Fewer than 10,000 visitors reach Mowich Lake annually, drawn by its quiet beauty and the network of trails that radiate from its shore. In 1967, a communications technician discovered that radios stopped working in a specific area northwest of the lake. The technician's name was Bernard Castle. He worked for the National Park Service, installing emergency communication relay stations throughout Mount Rainier. These stations formed a network that allowed rangers to maintain radio contact across the park's vast wilderness, essential for coordinating rescues and reporting hazardous conditions. On June 23rd, Castle was surveying potential sites for a relay station approximately half a mile from Moich Lake's northwestern shore. He carried a handheld VHF radio, standard equipment for field technicians working in remote areas. The radio had been functioning normally throughout the morning, maintaining clear contact with the base station at Longmire. At approximately 11:45, Castle's radio went silent. Not dead, not crackling with interference. Silent in a way that felt complete, as if the device had been wrapped in something that absorbed all electromagnetic radiation. Castle checked the battery. Full charge. He checked the antenna connection. Secure. He attempted to transmit. The radio's indicator lights showed normal operation, but no sound emerged from the speaker. No static. No background hiss. Nothing. Castle walked 20 paces back along his survey route. The radio resumed functioning immediately. Clear signal, normal background noise, full contact with the base station. He marked the location where the silence began. Then he walked forward again, past the marker. The radio went silent. He repeated this test 17 times, walking back and forth across an invisible boundary that separated working communication from complete absence. Castle spent the rest of the day mapping the boundary. He discovered it formed a nearly perfect circle, roughly 400 meters in diameter. The effect was consistent, regardless of direction of approach. Equipment worked normally outside the circle. Inside, every radio frequency became unreachable. He filed a technical report describing the phenomenon and recommending against installing a relay station in the affected area. The report included hand-drawn maps showing the boundary coordinates and detailed notes on the equipment behavior. The National Park Service sent 2 additional technicians to verify Castle's findings. They arrived in July with more sophisticated equipment spectrum analyzers, field strength meters, and multiple radio units operating on different frequencies. The results confirmed Castle's observations. Inside the circle, electromagnetic signals ceased to propagate. Outside, everything functioned normally. The technicians could find no geological explanation. The area contained no unusual mineral deposits, no underground metal formations, no obvious features that would create such an effect. The silence was absolute and inexplicable. A physicist from the University of Washington, Dr. Martin Lundquist, visited the site in August of 1967. He brought equipment designed to measure electromagnetic field strength and identify sources of interference. Dr. Lundquist's measurements showed normal background electromagnetic radiation at the circle's perimeter. Inside, the readings dropped to near zero. "It's not blocking the signals," he wrote in his field notes. "It's more like the signals cease to exist in this space, as if the physics governing electromagnetic propagation simply don't apply here." Dr. Lundquist spent 3 days conducting tests. He attempted to transmit across multiple frequencies: AM, FM, VHF, UHF. None penetrated the boundary. He placed a transmitter inside the circle and a receiver outside. No signal detected. He reversed the setup. Same result. The boundary was impermeable to radio waves in both directions. He recommended further study, including the deployment of more sensitive instrumentation and longer observation periods. The National Park Service agreed to provide access, but offered no funding for research. Dr. Lundquist applied for grants from multiple scientific foundations. All applications were declined, typically with brief notes stating the research did not align with current funding priorities. By 1970, the site had been informally designated as Zone 17 in Park Service technical documents. Rangers were advised to avoid relying on radio communication in that area. Hikers were not warned. There seemed no reason to alarm visitors about a phenomenon that posed no apparent physical danger. Over the following decades, occasional reports surfaced from people who had encountered the silent zone. A backpacker named Jennifer Okoro wrote in a 1983 trip journal that her walkie-talkie stopped working near Mowich Lake, resuming function only after she had walked some distance down the trail. She attributed it to dead batteries and thought nothing more of it. A wilderness ranger named Samuel Hawthorne filed an incident report in 1991 describing how his radio failed during a routine patrol northwest of the lake. He noted the failure occurred in the same general area where earlier reports had documented communication problems. Hawthorne attempted to contact park maintenance to request equipment inspection. He was told the radios were functioning properly and the issue was likely atmospheric. In 2003, a group of amateur radio enthusiasts obtained a permit to conduct communication experiments in Mount Rainier National Park. The group, led by a man named Victor Sorensen, was interested in testing long-range radio propagation in mountainous terrain. They set up equipment at various locations throughout the park, measuring signal strength and clarity. When Sorensen's team approached the area northwest of Mowich Lake, their equipment registered the same phenomenon Castle had documented 36 years earlier: complete signal loss within a defined circular boundary. The team spent 2 days mapping the perimeter with GPS units. The coordinates matched Castle's original survey within a margin of less than 5 meters. The circle had not moved, not in 36 years. Sorensen compiled his findings into a technical paper and submitted it to a journal specializing in electromagnetic phenomena. The paper was rejected. The reviewers stated that the described effect was inconsistent with known physics and would require extraordinary evidence beyond field measurements. Sorensen posted his data online, including GPS coordinates, spectrum analysis graphs, and photographs of the equipment showing normal operation outside the boundary and complete silence inside. The post attracted modest attention in radio enthusiast communities, but no mainstream scientific interest. In 2009, a graduate student in geophysics named Amanda Thibault attempted to include the Mowich Lake Silence Zone in her doctoral research on geomagnetic anomalies in the Pacific Northwest. Her thesis advisor discouraged the inclusion, suggesting it would undermine the credibility of her other work. Thibault removed the section and completed her degree without investigating the phenomenon. She tried again in 2014, by then working as a research geophysicist for the United States Geological Survey. She submitted a proposal to conduct a comprehensive study of the silent zone using ground-penetrating radar and magnetometer arrays. The proposal was denied. The stated reason was budget constraints, though Thibault later learned that other proposals submitted during the same funding cycle with similar costs were approved. The National Park Service has never issued an official statement about the silent zone. It does not appear in any public park literature or warning signs. Rangers who work in the area know about it through informal channels, stories passed between seasonal employees, notes in training manuals that are never included in official briefings. A ranger named Leslie Dubois, who worked at Mowich Lake from 2016 to 2019, described the silence zone in an interview conducted after she left Park Service employment. "Everyone knows about it," she said. "You just don't talk about it with visitors. What would you say? There's a spot where radios don't work for no reason we can explain? People already think park rangers are superstitious about certain areas. This would just confirm it." When asked if she had personally experienced the phenomenon, Dubois confirmed she had. "You can feel it," she said. "Not the radio dying. That's just equipment. But there's something about the silence. It's too complete. Like the space is swallowing sound, not just radio waves. The boundary remains. Hikers pass through it regularly without knowing. Their phones lose signal. Their GPS units falter. Their radios produce nothing but profound, empty silence. Most assume it's ordinary signal loss, the kind that happens in mountains and forests everywhere. But the silence at Moich Lake is not ordinary. It's geometric, precise, unchanged since Bernard Castle first mapped it in 1967. And no one knows why. The equipment still fails. The measurements still show zero electromagnetic propagation. The circle still sits in the forest northwest of a glacial lake, waiting for someone to explain what it is. But explanations require investigation, and investigation requires permission. And permission, it seems, is something the silent zone will never receive. The forest remains. The boundary remains. And in the space between transmitted words and received silence, something continues to absorb every frequency, every signal, every attempt at communication. As if the mountain has decided that some places should remain beyond the reach of human voices. Some structures refuse to stay destroyed. The Emmons Glacier descends Mount Rainier's northeast flank in a frozen river of ice that stretches over 4 miles, making it the largest glacier by area in the contiguous United States. The glacier's terminus, the point where ice meets rock and meltwater, begins its journey to the White River, sits at approximately 5,400 feet elevation in a landscape of glacial moraine and volcanic debris. The area is accessible via the Glacier Basin Trail, a moderate hike that draws geologists, mountaineers, and visitors interested in witnessing the slow violence of glacial retreat. Park policy prohibits the construction of unauthorized cairns, stacked rock formations that can confuse hikers by suggesting false trails or routes. Rangers remove these structures during routine patrols, documenting their locations and configurations in maintenance logs. It is standard work, unremarkable in its repetition, except for the cairn at the Emmons terminus, which returns every time it is taken apart. The first documented removal occurred in May of 2006. A seasonal ranger named Derek Wynn was conducting an early season patrol of the Glacier Basin area, checking for winter damage and clearing debris from established trails. Near the glacier's terminus, approximately 50 yards from where meltwater pools before forming the headwaters of the White River, Nguyen found a cairn constructed from local glacial stone. The cairn stood roughly 4 feet high, composed of 23 stones stacked in a stable configuration. The construction showed skill, each stone carefully balanced, the structure solid despite having no mortar or binding material. Nguyen photographed it, noting its location with GPS coordinates, then dismantled it according to park policy. He scattered the stones across a wide area to discourage reconstruction. The following morning, during his return patrol, the cairn was standing again. Same location, same height, same number of stones in the same careful arrangement. Nguyen assumed another hiker had rebuilt it, perhaps someone who had arrived after his patrol and decided to recreate the structure. He dismantled it again, this time moving the stones even farther apart, some of them 50 feet or more from the original site. On his third patrol, 24 hours later, the cairn had returned. Nguyen filed a report with the park's Resource Management Office. The report described the cairn's location, its dimensions, and the fact that it had been reconstructed twice after removal. He recommended increased ranger presence in the area to identify whoever was rebuilding the structure. A supervisor named Eileen Kowalczyk reviewed the report and assigned additional patrols to the Emmons terminus. Rangers documented 12 separate removals of the cairn between May and September of 2006. Each time, the cairn reappeared within 24 hours, always in the exact same configuration. No one was ever observed rebuilding it. In August of 2006, rangers installed a motion-activated trail camera aimed directly at the cairn's location. The camera was designed to photograph anything that moved within its field of view, triggered by both motion and heat signatures. Rangers dismantled the cairn at 1400 hours on August 17th and left the camera to monitor the site. The camera captured 143 images over the next 18 hours. The images showed the empty location where the cairn had stood. Shadows shifted as the sun moved across the sky. Light changed from afternoon brightness to evening dimness, to the deep blue of mountain twilight. At 0632 on August 18th, an image showed the cairn standing complete. The previous image, time-stamped 0629, showed empty ground, 3 minutes between frames. No human figure, no indication of movement. The cairn simply appeared, as if it had always been there. Rangers reviewed the camera footage extensively. A technical specialist named Victor Reyes examined the camera itself, checking for malfunctions or tampering. The camera had operated normally. The images were sequential and unaltered. There was no evidence of equipment failure. The cairn had rebuilt itself between camera exposures. Park officials contacted the University of Washington's Department of Earth and Space Sciences, requesting consultation on possible natural explanations. A graduate student in geology, Andrea Schulman, visited the site in September of 2006 with ground-penetrating radar equipment. The radar survey revealed nothing beneath the cairn. No buried foundation, no hidden supports, no subsurface structures that would explain how stones could reassemble themselves. The ground showed typical glacial till composition: loose rock, gravel, and compacted soil, deposited by the retreating glacier. Schulman collected rock samples from the cairn and the surrounding area. Petrographic analysis showed the stones were ordinary andesite and basalt, volcanic rock common throughout Mount Rainier. Nothing unusual in composition or magnetic properties. Nothing that would cause autonomous movement or spontaneous stacking. She documented her findings in a brief report submitted to the Park Service and her academic advisor. The report concluded that no geological mechanism could account for the cairn's behavior. Her advisor suggested she avoid including the phenomenon in her thesis work, noting that unexplained observations without supporting theory would not strengthen her academic credentials. Between 2007 and 2024, park rangers have removed the cairn 137 times. It has returned 137 times, always within 18 to 36 hours, always in identical configuration. The stones are always the same 23 pieces. Rangers have marked individual stones with paint, numbers, and identification codes. When the cairn returns, those same marked stones appear in their designated positions within the structure. In 2011, rangers attempted an experiment. They removed the cairn and transported all 23 stones more than a quarter-mile away, scattering them in different directions across difficult terrain. Some were placed in dense brush. Others were left in the middle of the White River, submerged in fast-moving water. The cairn reappeared at its original location 31 hours later, constructed from the same marked stones. Rangers returned to the scatter locations. The stones were gone. Every marked piece had vanished from where it had been placed and returned to the terminus to rebuild the structure. A wilderness ranger named Felicia Thornton, who participated in the 2011 experiment, described the experience in an interview conducted years after she left Park Service employment. "We never talked about it officially," she said, "but everyone who worked that area knew the cairn wasn't normal. You could feel it when you stood next to it. Not scared, exactly, just aware that you were looking at something that shouldn't be possible." When asked what she meant by that, Thornton chose her words carefully. "The stones were cold," she said, "colder than they should have been, even in glacier runoff. And the structure was always perfect. Not a single stone out of place, no matter how many times we took it apart." Park administration has never issued a public statement about the cairn. Internal documents reference it only obliquely, describing recurring unauthorized trail markers at Emmons Terminus and noting ongoing removal efforts per standard policy. In 2016, a documentary filmmaker named James Vukovich obtained a permit to film in Mount Rainier National Park. His project focused on glacial retreat and climate change. During location scouting, He learned about the cairn from a park volunteer who mentioned it casually. Vukovic requested permission to film the cairn and document its removal and reconstruction. The park denied the request, stating that filming maintenance activities was not consistent with his approved permit scope. Vukovic attempted to film the cairn without specific permission, setting up a camera near the terminus during a day hike. A ranger approached within an hour and informed him that filming in that specific area required special authorization. Vukovic asked why. The ranger said only that the area was designated for administrative monitoring and was not open for recreational filming. No such designation appears in any public park documentation. The cairn continues its cycle. Rangers continue their removals, and the stones continue to return, stacking themselves in darkness or daylight, in rain or sun, with a consistency that suggests either profound human dedication or something that operates outside human effort entirely. Hikers occasionally photograph the cairn, posting images online with captions about interesting rock formations near the Emmons Glacier. They do not know it was dismantled hours before they arrived. They do not know it will be dismantled again after they leave, and that it will return, patient and exact, before the next group of visitors makes the hike to witness the glacier's retreat. The Puyallup tribe, whose ancestors lived in the shadow of Mount Rainier for thousands of years before the park's creation, have stories about markers that should not be disturbed. Elders speak of boundary stones that mark places where the natural and human worlds maintain specific agreements, though the nature of those agreements is not shared with outsiders. Whether the cairn at the Emmons terminus represents such a marker remains unknown. The park does not consult tribal historians about maintenance policies, and the stones offer no explanation, only their silent, stubborn return. Each spring, when rangers begin their seasonal patrols, they find the cairn standing at the glacier's edge. They photograph it, document its configuration, and take it apart. By the next morning, it stands again, 23 stones in perfect arrangement, cold to the touch, marking a boundary that no amount of human interference seems capable of erasing. And somewhere in the archives at Mount Rainier National Park, maintenance logs accumulate entries that all say the same thing: cairn removed, stones scattered, cairn returned. No explanation, no resolution. Just the simple, unsettling fact that some structures rebuild themselves and some boundaries insist on being marked, regardless of policy or permission or human understanding of what is possible. There are names written in places they should not yet exist. Columbia Crest marks the true summit of Mount Rainier at 14,411 feet, the highest point in the Cascade Range. The summit crater forms a broad, wind-scoured platform of volcanic rock and permanent snow, large enough for dozens of climbers to stand simultaneously during peak season. The views extend across Washington state, from the Olympic Mountains to the west to the Columbia River Gorge in the south. On clear days, climbers report seeing Mount Hood in Oregon, 70 miles distant. Since the first recorded ascent in 1870, more than 100,000 people have reached this summit. They sign register books placed in weatherproof containers, leaving their names, dates, brief messages documenting their achievement. These books serve as historical records, tracking who summited and when, creating an archive of human ambition and endurance. In April of 2004, Mount Rainier National Park installed a new summit register at Columbia Crest. The book was a standard wilderness log, bound in water-resistant material, with dated pages spanning from April 15, 2004 through December 31, 2005. A park ranger named Thomas Whitfield carried the book to the summit during an early season patrol, replacing the previous register that had been filled completely. Whitfield opened the new book to verify it was empty before sealing it in the weatherproof container. The pages were blank, as expected. He signed the first entry, dating it April 17, 2004, then placed the book in the container and secured it beneath a rock cairn at the summit's highest point. When the book was retrieved for routine inspection in October of 2004, it contained entries that should not have been possible. The ranger who collected the book was named Diane Kowalski. She had been assigned to retrieve the register as part of end-of-season maintenance before heavy snow made summit access dangerous. Kowalski carried the register back to park headquarters at Longmire and filed it with other completed summit logs in the administrative archive. During the filing process, a park volunteer named Marcus Ellsworth was cataloging the entries for the park's historical database. He noticed discrepancies immediately. 17 signatures were dated for times that had not yet occurred. The earliest anomalous entry was dated May 2nd, 2004, 2 weeks after Whitfield had installed the empty book. The signature read, Jonathan Vasquez, with a notation stating, Solo Ascent, Disappointment Cleaver Route. Below that, another signature dated June 8th, 2004, belonged to someone named Sarah Kimura. A third entry, dated August 19th, 2004, was signed Michael Brennan and Catherine Sorensen. All of these entries had been written in the register before those dates arrived. The pages were filled sequentially, with future dated entries appearing alongside past dated ones in chronological order, as if multiple timelines were writing into the same physical book. The most disturbing entry was dated January 7th, 2005, 9 months in the future, when the book was retrieved. It was signed Rebecca Taft, with a note reading, First Winter Summit of the Year. Ellsworth brought the anomalies to Kowalski's attention. Kowalski reviewed the register herself, cross-referencing the entries against climbing permits issued by the park. She found no permits matching the names on the future dated entries. No Jonathan Vasquez had been authorized to climb on May 2nd. No Sarah Kimura had registered for a June 8th ascent. Kowalski assumed the entries were pranks. Climbers sometimes falsified dates or signed registers multiple times as jokes. But the signatures appeared genuine, written in different hands, using different pens, showing natural variation in pressure and style. They did not look like deliberate forgeries. As the calendar advanced into 2005, something more unsettling emerged. On January 7th, 2005, a climber named Rebecca Taft reached the summit of Mount Rainier. She was part of a guided expedition that had obtained permits weeks earlier. Taft signed the summit register, dating her entry January 7th, 2005, and noting that her group had achieved the first winter summit of the year. When rangers later compared her signature to the anomalous entry from the 2004 register, the handwriting matched. Same letter formation, same pressure patterns, same distinctive way she wrote the letter R in Rebecca. But Rebecca Taft had never seen the 2004 register. That book had been removed from the summit in October and archived at Longmire. The register Taft signed in January 2005 was a different book installed in November of 2004. Kowalski contacted Taft through the guiding company that had organized her climb. In a brief email exchange, Taft confirmed she had summited on January 7th, 2005, and had signed the register on that date. She had never been to Mount Rainier before. She had no explanation for how her signature could appear in a book that had been archived 3 months before she made her climb. Park officials conducted handwriting analysis through a forensic document examiner named Dr. Patricia Halloway. Dr. Halloway compared the January 7th entry in the archived 2004 register with the January 7th entry in the current 2005 register. Her analysis confirmed the signatures were written by the same person. The pen pressure, stroke patterns, and subtle variations in letter spacing all matched. Either the same individual signed both books on different dates, Dr. Halloway wrote in her report, or we are looking at an identical forgery executed with extraordinary precision. But forgery required access. The 2004 register had been sealed and archived. No public access was permitted to archived summit books. and forging Rebecca Taft's signature required knowing in advance that she would summit on January 7, 2005, information that would not have been available until Taft registered for her climb in December of 2004. The pattern repeated with other names. On May 2, 2004, no one named Jonathan Vasquez summited Mount Rainier. But on May 2, 2005, a climber named Jonathan Vasquez reached Columbia Crest via the Disappointment Cleaver route. His signature in the 2005 register matched the anomalous entry from the 2004 book. Sarah Kimura summited on June 8, 2005. Michael Brennan and Catherine Sorensen reached the peak together on August 19, 2005. Every anomalous entry from the 2004 register corresponded to an actual climber who summited exactly 1 year later, except the signatures appeared before the climbers existed in the park system. Park administration launched a quiet internal investigation. A resource management specialist named Victor Delgado interviewed the climbers whose names appeared in both registers. None of them could explain the discrepancy. Most assumed it was an administrative error, a misfiled document, or confused dates. One climber, a woman named Catherine Sorensen, offered a different observation during her interview. "I had a strange feeling on the summit," she said, "like I'd been there before. Even though it was my first time, I remember looking at the register and thinking the book seemed familiar, like I'd already signed it somewhere." Delgado asked if she had ever seen the 2004 register. Sorensen said she had not. But the feeling persisted, she explained. A sense of repetition, of having already completed an action she was performing for the first time. Delgado documented these accounts, but could offer no explanation. He recommended consulting with experts in document security and temporal anomalies, though he acknowledged in his report that he was uncertain what field of expertise would even address such a phenomenon. The National Park Service consulted with researchers at the University of Washington. A physicist specializing in temporal mechanics, Dr. Raymond Schultz, reviewed the evidence and declined to comment officially. Off the record, he told park officials that closed time-like curves, theoretical paths through space-time, that loop back on themselves were mathematically possible but had never been observed in nature. "If this is genuine," he said, "it suggests information is moving backward through time in a very localized and specific way. But I can't explain why it would only affect Summit Register books or why the temporal displacement is exactly 1 year." No further research was authorized. The investigation was quietly closed in March of 2006. The 2004 register remains in the park archive at Longmire, stored in a climate-controlled vault alongside decades of other summit logs. Access is restricted to park historians and researchers with explicit authorization. No authorization has been granted since 2008. Rebecca Taft, now living in Portland, occasionally receives requests from researchers and journalists asking about her summit experience. She declines most interviews. In a rare statement provided to a climbing magazine in 2019, she wrote, "I don't know how my signature got into that book before I climbed the mountain. I don't think about it much. But sometimes I wonder if the climb I remember making is the same one that happened, or if I'm remembering something that already existed before I lived it." The Summit Register system at Mount Rainier has been modified since 2004. Books are now checked more frequently, with each page photographed and archived digitally before the physical book is placed on the summit. No further temporal anomalies have been reported in official park documents. But climbers still sign the registers. They write their names and dates, documenting their presence at 14,000 feet, adding their achievement to the historical record. And somewhere in the archive at Longmire, 17 signatures wait in a book that was supposed to be empty, written by people who had not yet made the climb, in handwriting that would not exist for another year. The entries remain. The matches remain. And no one has explained how a signature can be genuine when written by a hand that has not yet held a pen on a mountain it has not yet climbed. Some marks refuse to fade with time. The Cowlitz Glacier descends Mount Rainier's southeast face in a broad sweep of ice and snow, draining into the Paradise and Stevens glacial systems. The glacier has been retreating since measurements began in the early 20th century, exposing new rock and sediment each summer as the ice pulls back from its historical extent. At its current terminus, approximately 6,200 feet elevation, the glacier produces meltwater that feeds the Cowlitz River, flowing eventually to the Columbia and the Pacific Ocean. Glaciologists have studied this ice field extensively, measuring ablation rates, documenting crevasse formation, and tracking the glacier's response to climate patterns. The surface changes constantly. Snow accumulates in winter, melts in summer, ice flows downslope at rates measured in feet per year. Nothing on a glacier's surface is permanent. Wind, sun, and precipitation erase all traces of passage within days or weeks at most, except for a set of footprints that return every spring in the same configuration, as if they were carved into the ice itself, rather than pressed upon it. The prints were first photographed in 1952 by a mountaineer named Walter Garrison. Garrison was documenting glacial conditions for the Mountaineers Club, a Seattle-based organization that maintained detailed records of climbing routes and seasonal changes on Mount Rainier. His photographs, preserved in the club's archive, show a clear line of boot prints crossing a section of the Cowlitz Glacier's upper snowfield. The prints were unremarkable at the time. Climbers crossed the glacier regularly during summer months, leaving tracks that would disappear with the next snowfall or seasonal melt. Garrison's photographs were filed as routine documentation. In 1973, a glaciologist named Dr. Raymond Pritchard was conducting a photographic survey comparing current glacier extent to historical images. He used Garrison's 1952 photographs as baseline references, matching locations using prominent rock formations and topographic features. When Dr. Pritchard visited the Cowlitz Glacier in July of 1973, he found footprints in the exact locations shown in Garrison's photographs from 21 years earlier. The prints were identical, same stride length, approximately 32 inches, same depth, suggesting a person weighing between 160 and 180 pounds. Same directional line, crossing from southeast to northwest across the upper snowfield. Dr. Pritchard assumed recent climbers had coincidentally walked the same route, but when he examined the prints more closely, he noticed details that troubled him. The boot tread pattern was distinctive, a waffle grid design with deep square lugs. The pattern matched exactly what appeared in Garrison's 1952 photographs. That tread design had been used by the Loa Company for mountaineering boots, manufactured between 1946 and 1949. The style was discontinued when newer designs proved more effective for glacier travel. No modern climber in 1973 would have been wearing boots from that era. Dr. Pritchard photographed the prints from multiple angles, using the same vantage points Garrison had employed. When he compared his images to the 1952 originals, the footprints were indistinguishable. Same locations, same tread pattern, same spacing. He documented his observations in a field report submitted to the North Cascades Glacier Climate Project, a research initiative tracking glacial retreat in the Pacific Northwest. The report noted the unusual persistence of the footprints, but offered no explanation, suggesting that unusual snow conditions might preserve tracks longer than typical melt cycles would allow. The following summer, in 1974, Dr. Pritchard returned to the Cowlitz Glacier. The winter snowpack had been substantial, burying the previous summer's surface under 15 feet of new accumulation. As the snow melted through June and July, the glacier's surface descended through layers of seasonal deposition. The footprints appeared again, at precisely the same locations, as the melt exposed the level where they had been observed in 1973. Dr. Pritchard marked the locations with GPS coordinates technology that was becoming available for scientific fieldwork in the mid-1970s. He installed measurement stakes to track ice movement and surface ablation. The glacier flowed at its normal rate, several feet per year. The surface melted and reformed with seasonal cycles. But the footprints persisted, reappearing each spring, melt in the exact same positions relative to the surrounding bedrock. Between 1974 and 1992, Dr. Pritchard documented the footprints annually. He published 3 papers on glacial preservation anomalies, though none explicitly focused on the Cowlitz prints. In private correspondence with colleagues, he expressed increasing frustration at his inability to explain the phenomenon. "I've measured everything," he wrote in a 1987 letter to a fellow glaciologist at the University of Alaska. "Ice density, surface temperature, subsurface structure. The prints exist in ice that flows and melts like any other glacier ice. There's no physical mechanism that would preserve them for decades while everything else on the surface erases and reforms." In 1993, a graduate student named Lisa Moreau joined Dr. Pritchard's research team. Moreau specialized in glacier forensics, using preserved materials in ice to reconstruct historical events and conditions. She became fascinated with the Cowlitz footprints and made them the focus of her doctoral research. Moreau conducted extensive analysis of the boot tread pattern, consulting with footwear historians and vintage equipment collectors. She confirmed the prints matched Loa mountaineering boots from the late 1940s. She also discovered something Dr. Pritchard had not documented. The prints showed wear patterns consistent with a specific individual's gait. The left boot print displayed slightly more wear on the outer heel, suggesting the person walked with a mild supination of the left foot. The right boot showed even wear, indicating normal pronation. These patterns repeated identically across all visible prints. Moreau attempted to extract DNA or fabric residue from the ice surrounding the prints. She used sterile coring techniques to sample the immediate area. The ice yielded nothing, no organic material, no synthetic fibers, just crystalline water ice, showing normal isotopic composition for mid-20th century precipitation. She documented her findings in her dissertation, submitted in 1997. The dissertation was approved, but her faculty advisor recommended she not pursue publication of the sections dealing with the Cowlitz prints. "The data is solid," he told her, "but the implications are too unusual. You'll damage your credibility as a researcher if you lead with this." Moreau moved into applied glaciology, working for environmental consulting firms, assessing glacier retreat and water resource impacts. She stopped visiting the Cowlitz Glacier, but the prints continued to appear. In 2006, a wilderness ranger named Dennis Holloway was conducting a routine patrol of the Paradise Glacier area. He was familiar with the Cowlitz footprints. Rangers, who worked the area long enough, learned about them through informal channels. Park policy did not acknowledge the phenomenon officially, but rangers knew where the prints appeared and when. Holloway photographed the prints during his patrol and compared them to historical images he had seen in park archives. The prints were unchanged. Same locations, visible as the snowpack melted to expose the ice surface beneath. He filed his photographs with his patrol report. A resource management specialist named Claudia Voss reviewed the report and contacted Holloway to ask if he had noticed anything unusual about the prints beyond their persistence. Holloway said they looked fresh, like someone had walked through that morning, he reported. The edges were crisp, no wind erosion, no melt degradation. They looked hours old, not decades. Voss asked if Holloway had seen any recent climbers in that area. He confirmed no climbing parties had crossed that section of glacier during his patrol period. The route was not commonly used by modern mountaineers, who typically ascended via different approach corridors. Voss added Holloway's observations to an internal file that contained decades of similar reports. The file was not classified, but it was not publicly accessible either. It existed in administrative archives, accumulating evidence of something that should not be possible but continued to occur with seasonal regularity. In 2019, a team of climate researchers from Oregon State University received a permit to study glacier retreat rates on Mount Rainier. The team included a remote sensing specialist named Dr. Angela Ramos, who used ground-penetrating radar to image subsurface ice structure. During her survey of the Cowlitz Glacier, Dr. Ramos detected anomalous reflection patterns in the ice where the footprints appeared. The radar showed what she described as density discontinuities, areas where the ice crystal structure differed from the surrounding matrix. The discontinuities extended approximately 6 inches deep into the glacier, following the exact outline of the boot prints. Below that depth, the ice returned to normal structure. Above, the surface showed the visible tread impressions. Dr. Ramos could not explain what would create such persistent structural anomalies in flowing ice. She collected her data and included it in her team's report on glacier dynamics. The section describing the Cowlitz footprints was removed during peer review, with reviewers noting it was insufficiently contextualized within existing glaciological theory. The prints remain. Each spring, as the winter snow melts away, they emerge from beneath the seasonal accumulation. Rangers photograph them, researchers document them, and the ice holds them, year after year, refusing to let them fade into the normal erosion that claims every other mark made upon the glacier's surface. No one knows who made the original prints. No climbing records from the late 1940s or early 1950s mention an incident or disappearance on the Cowlitz Glacier. No boots matching the tread pattern have been found in the park's lost and found archives or historical collections. The prints simply exist, walking across the ice in a direction that leads nowhere modern routes would go, made by someone wearing equipment that no longer exists, preserved by a mechanism that glaciology cannot explain. And each year, when the snow melts enough to expose them, they look fresh, as if the person who made them had passed through just hours before, leaving behind the only permanent mark anyone has ever made on the moving surface of a dying glacier. Some spaces refuse to be unoccupied. Camp Sherman sits at 9,600 feet on Mount Rainier's northeastern flank, perched on a rocky outcrop between the Emmons and Winthrop glaciers. Established in 1958 and named after Clark Sherman, a climbing guide who died on Mount Rainier in 1921, the camp serves as a high-altitude staging point for climbers attempting the summit via the Emmons-Winthrop route. The location is harsh. Wind scours the camp year-round. Temperatures regularly drop below zero in winter, and the nearest tree line lies 3,000 feet below. The camp consists of a ranger station occupied during summer months, several tent platforms carved into rock and ice, and a stone emergency shelter constructed in 1961 by the National Park Service. The shelter measures roughly 8 feet by 10 feet, built from stacked volcanic rock with a low entrance designed to prevent snow accumulation. It contains no windows, no ventilation beyond the door gap, and no equipment except emergency supplies stored in weatherproof containers. The shelter should be as cold as the surrounding environment. At 9,600 feet, with no insulation and no heat source, the interior temperature should match the exterior within a few degrees. In winter, that means well below freezing. In summer, temperatures might reach the mid-40s on warm days. But temperature readings taken inside the shelter have remained constant at 58 degrees Fahrenheit since at least 1976, regardless of external conditions. The anomaly was first documented by a climbing ranger named Gerald Hoskins. Hoskins spent summers at Camp Sherman from 1974 through 1982, managing the ranger station and coordinating summit attempts. As part of his duties, he maintained weather logs and conducted safety inspections of the emergency shelter. In July of 1976, Hoskins noticed that the shelter's interior felt warmer than it should. He checked his thermometer. Exterior temperature, 43 degrees. Interior shelter temperature, 58 degrees. Hoskins assumed the shelter was retaining heat from the previous day's sun exposure, but the shelter faced northeast, received minimal direct sunlight, and was constructed from stone that conducted heat poorly. There was no mechanism for heat retention that would create a 15-degree temperature differential. He returned the following morning before sunrise. Exterior temperature, 34 degrees. Interior temperature, 58 degrees. Hoskins began taking daily temperature readings throughout the summer. The exterior temperature fluctuated normally with weather patterns and time of day. The interior remained precisely 58 degrees, never varying by more than a single degree across 3 months of measurement. In winter of 1977, a mountaineering team attempting a rare off-season ascent stopped at Camp Sherman. The team leader, a climber named Douglas Whitmore, recorded in his expedition journal that the emergency shelter provided unexpected warmth during their overnight stay. Exterior conditions were severe temperatures near zero, winds gusting above 50 miles per hour. Inside the shelter, Whitmore's thermometer read 58 degrees. The team was grateful for the refuge. But Whitmore noted something else in his journal, something he described as an uncomfortable feeling of not being alone. He wrote, "We stayed only a few hours. The shelter was empty, but it didn't feel empty, like walking into someone's home uninvited. We moved to the tent platforms instead." Similar accounts began appearing in climbing reports and ranger logs throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. A wilderness ranger named Pamela Rutkowski, who worked at Camp Sherman during the summer of 1981, described the sensation in her personal notes. "You open the door and immediately feel like you're intruding," she wrote. "Not scared, not threatened, just awkward, like you've walked into a room where someone was sitting quietly and you've interrupted them. I've checked the shelter dozens of times. It's always empty, but the feeling never goes away." Rutkowski conducted her own temperature measurements, confirming Hoskins's observations. She also noticed that the warmth was distributed evenly throughout the small space. No warm spots, no cold corners. Just uniform 58 degrees, as if the air itself was being held at that temperature by some invisible mechanism. In 1983, a National Park Service maintenance team inspected the shelter as part of routine facility assessments. The team included a structural engineer named Victor Amundsen and a thermal systems specialist named Dr. Helena Kowalski. They were asked to determine if the shelter's construction contained any features that would explain the temperature anomaly. Amundsen's structural analysis found nothing unusual. The shelter was built from local andesite and basalt, mortared with standard cement. The walls were 18 inches thick, substantial, but not insulated. There were no hidden chambers, no subsurface connections to geothermal sources, no architectural features that would retain or generate heat. Dr. Kowalski used infrared thermography to map the shelter's thermal profile. The images showed the interior maintained consistent temperature while the exterior walls matched ambient conditions. Heat was not radiating from the ground beneath the shelter. It was not conducting through the walls. It simply existed within the enclosed space, defying the basic thermodynamic principle that heat flows from warm to cold until equilibrium is reached. There should be heat loss, Dr. Kowalski wrote in her report, constant, measurable heat loss through the walls, the door gap, any crack or seam. We're not seeing that. The shelter maintains temperature as if it's connected to an external heat source, but no such source exists. The report was filed with the park's Resource Management Office. No follow-up investigation was authorized. The shelter continued to be used by climbers and rangers, and the temperature anomaly became an accepted oddity of Camp Sherman, something rangers mentioned informally but rarely documented officially. The feeling of intrusion, however, proved more persistent and more unsettling. A climber named Jennifer Ostrovsky stayed in the shelter during a storm in August of 1994. She described the experience in a letter to a friend, later shared with a mountaineering magazine. "The warmth was nice," she wrote, "but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by anything visible, just aware of presence. Like someone was sitting in the corner, silent, waiting for me to leave. I kept my headlamp on the whole time, checking the space. Always empty, but the feeling never stopped." A wilderness guide named Marcus DeLuca led clients to the shelter in July of 2003. His group stayed for less than an hour before moving to tent platforms. When asked later why they left the shelter, DeLuca said simply, "It didn't feel right. Everyone in the group felt it, like we weren't supposed to be there." In 2009, a graduate student in environmental psychology named Dr. Simone Blackwell attempted to study the phenomenon as part of her research on human responses to isolated environments. She spent 3 nights in the shelter, alone, documenting her observations and psychological state. Dr. Blackwell confirmed the temperature readings, 58 degrees, constant. She also experienced the sense of intrusion, describing it as non-threatening but persistent awareness of occupancy. She set up motion-activated cameras inside the shelter, hoping to identify any visual stimuli that might trigger the psychological response. The cameras recorded nothing. Empty stone walls, empty floor space, no movement, no shadows, no changes in light that would explain the feeling of presence. Dr. Blackwell's research was never published. In a brief statement provided to colleagues, she indicated that her findings were inconclusive and not suitable for academic presentation. She declined to elaborate. Park Service employees who work at Camp Sherman have developed informal protocols around the shelter. Rangers check it regularly for safety purposes, but avoid spending unnecessary time inside. Climbers are told the shelter is available for emergencies, but are not actively encouraged to use it. A climbing ranger named Leslie Morales, who worked at Sherman from 2015 to 2018, described the unspoken understanding among staff. "You don't talk about it with climbers," she said in an interview after leaving Park Service employment. "What would you say? The shelter is warm and feels haunted?" But among rangers, everyone knows. You go in, you check the supplies, you leave. You don't linger. Morales confirmed that the temperature anomaly persists. She measured 58 degrees during winter maintenance checks in 2017, with exterior temperatures at minus 12 degrees Fahrenheit. "I've worked in cold environments my whole career," she said. "I know what heat retention feels like, what geothermal influence feels like. This is neither. The shelter is warm because it's warm. No mechanism, no explanation, just warm." When asked about the feeling of intrusion, Morales hesitated before responding. "It's real," she said. "Everyone who spends time in that shelter feels it. You're not welcome there. Not in a hostile way, just in a 'this space is occupied' way. And it is occupied, not by anything you can see, but by something." The National Park Service has never issued an official statement about the Camp Sherman shelter. Temperature logs exist in ranger station records, documenting the 58-degree constant across decades. But these logs are filed as routine observations, not anomalies requiring investigation. Requests from researchers to study the shelter have been quietly declined. A physicist from the University of Washington submitted a proposal in 2012 to install long-term monitoring equipment. The proposal was denied without detailed explanation. A similar request from a team of thermal engineers in 2019 received the same response. The shelter remains in use. Climbers still seek refuge there during storms. Rangers still conduct safety inspections. And the temperature stays at 58 degrees, year after year, winter and summer, unchanged by the brutal cold or the brief warmth of alpine summer. And the presence remains. Visitors still report the same sensation Gerald Hoskins first documented in 1976. The feeling of walking into an occupied room. The awareness of something that was there before you arrived and will remain after you leave. Rangers no longer question it. Climbers who experience it rarely speak of it afterward. The shelter simply exists in its state of permanent, inexplicable warmth, holding its temperature and its secret with equal constancy. At 9,600 feet, where nothing should be warm and nothing should feel occupied, the stone walls contain something that refuses to be cold and refuses to be alone. And every person who steps inside knows, immediately and instinctively, that the shelter was never truly empty. Not when they arrived, not when they leave, not ever. Some surfaces show what has not yet arrived. Spray Park sits at 5,800 feet on Mount Rainier's northwestern shoulder, accessible via a steep trail that climbs through old-growth forest before breaking into subalpine meadows. The area earned its name from the mist that rises from numerous seasonal waterfalls cascading down the slopes of Mount Pleasant. During peak wildflower season in late July and early August, the meadows transform into carpets of lupine, paintbrush, and avalanche lily that draw photographers and hikers from across the Pacific Northwest. Hidden among the larger meadows, approximately 200 yards west of the main trail, lies a small tarn that appears on no official park maps. The water body measures roughly 40 feet across at its widest point, fed by snowmelt and seasonal runoff. Most hikers never see it. The tarn sits in a shallow depression, surrounded by Krummholz's stunted subalpine fir, twisted by wind and winter snow, that obscures it from casual view. Local climbing guides know about it. A few long-time park volunteers mention it in private conversations. But the tarn has never been officially documented, never received a name, and appears in park records only as an unmarked feature, occasionally noted in patrol logs. In August of 2006, a wilderness ranger named Patricia Okonkwo was conducting a routine patrol of the Spray Park area when she stopped to rest near the tarn. The day was clear, the sky a deep alpine blue, broken only by thin cirrus clouds at high altitude. Okonkwo sat on a rock at the water's edge, eating a trail lunch and reviewing her patrol notes. When she glanced at the tarn's surface, she saw storm clouds reflected in the water, dark cumulonimbus formations, dense and threatening, moving rapidly across the reflection. Okonkwo looked up. The sky remained clear. She looked back at the water. Storm clouds, perfectly detailed, as if the tarn was reflecting a different sky than the one overhead. Okonkwo stood and walked around the tarn's perimeter, changing her viewing angle. The reflection remained consistent storm clouds, wind-driven and turbulent, while the actual sky showed no such features. She photographed the phenomenon with a digital camera she carried for documenting trail conditions. The images captured what she was seeing: clear blue sky in the background, dark storm clouds reflected on the water's surface. 22 hours later, a severe thunderstorm system moved across Mount Rainier. The National Weather Service had not forecast the system. It developed rapidly over the Cascade Crest and produced intense lightning, heavy rain, and hail across the northern sections of the park. The storm's cloud formations matched, with remarkable precision, what Okonkwo had seen reflected in the tarn. Okonkwo filed a report describing the incident. She included her photographs and noted the temporal correlation between the reflection and the subsequent weather event. The report was reviewed by a park resource specialist named Vincent Morales, who acknowledged receipt and indicated he would investigate further. No investigation occurred. Okonkwo followed up twice over the next month. Morales responded each time with brief messages stating the matter was under review. By October, when seasonal snow closed access to Spray Park, no official response had been provided. The following summer, Okonkwo returned to the tarn during her patrol rotation. On June 27, 2007, she observed the phenomenon again. The sky was overcast with typical marine layer clouds, flat, gray, unremarkable. The tarn's reflection showed stars, not faint stars, glimpsed through cloud breaks. A full stellar field, clear and bright, as if photographed on a moonless night, far from any light pollution. Okonkwo could identify constellations: Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, Orion. She photographed the reflection, then waited. 14 hours later, after sunset, the clouds cleared. The night sky revealed the exact stellar configuration she had seen in the Tarn's reflection that morning. Okonkwo documented this observation and submitted another report. This time, she requested that a scientific specialist visit the site to conduct measurements and analysis. Her request was acknowledged but not approved. Budget constraints were cited. In frustration, Okonkwo contacted a former colleague who had left Park Service employment to work at the University of Washington's Department of Atmospheric Sciences. The colleague, Dr. Margaret Schulman, was intrigued enough to visit the Tarn on her own time during a weekend hiking trip in August of 2007. Dr. Schulman brought basic monitoring equipment: a surface thermometer, a handheld weather station, and a spectrometer for analyzing light reflection. She spent 6 hours at the site, conducting measurements and observations. The Tarn's surface temperature fluctuated in ways Dr. Schulman could not explain. Over the course of her observation period, the water temperature varied between 48 and 56 degrees Fahrenheit, changing in cycles that lasted approximately 18 to 22 minutes. Air temperature remained constant. Solar exposure remained constant. There was no environmental factor that would cause such regular thermal oscillation. More significantly, Dr. Schulman observed the reflection phenomenon herself. At 2:30 in the afternoon, under partly cloudy skies, the Tarn's surface showed a reflection of complete overcast. She photographed it, noted the time, and continued her measurements. At 9:15 the following morning, the sky over Spray Park matched the reflection Dr. Schulman had photographed 19 hours earlier. Same cloud density, same formations. The correlation was precise enough that she could match specific cloud structures between her photograph and the actual sky. Dr. Schulman wrote a detailed field report and submitted it to her department chair, recommending a comprehensive study of the Tarn's properties. The chair reviewed the report and declined to pursue it. In a brief email response, he suggested the observations were likely coincidental, and that the Tarn's thermal fluctuations could be explained by subsurface water flow patterns. Dr. Schulman disagreed, but lacked funding or institutional support to continue independent research. She shared her findings with Okonkwo and encouraged the Park Service to conduct their own investigation. No such investigation materialized. Between 2008 and 2012, Okonkwo documented 14 additional instances of the reflection phenomenon. Each time, the Tarn's surface showed weather or sky conditions that manifested between 16 and 26 hours later. Storm systems, clear skies, fog formations, even specific cloud shapes, all appeared in reflection before appearing in reality. Other rangers began noticing the pattern. A seasonal employee named Douglas Whitaker mentioned in a 2010 trip report that he had seen strange reflections in a small lake near Spray Park. A wilderness volunteer named Jennifer Vasquez described the Tarn in a 2011 interview as a place where the water knows what's coming. In 2013, a hiking group from Tacoma stumbled upon the Tarn while exploring off-trail. One member, a photographer named Luis Fernandez, took extensive images of the area. Several of his photographs captured the reflection anomaly, a sunset reflected in the water at 11 in the morning. Fernandez posted the images on a photography forum, noting they were strange but unedited. The post attracted attention from meteorology enthusiasts and amateur investigators. Several people contacted Fernandez asking for the location. He provided general directions: off-trail in Spray Park, northwest of the main path. Within 2 weeks, the forum post was deleted. Fernandez later told friends that he had been contacted by a National Park Service representative who politely requested he remove the images and location information. The representative cited concerns about off-trail travel and environmental impact in sensitive alpine areas. Fernandez complied, but kept his original photographs. In a 2019 interview, he confirmed that the sunset he photographed in the Tarn's reflection occurred at the exact time and with the exact coloring that evening, 7 hours after he took the picture. "I thought maybe it was some optical trick," Fernandez said. "Light refraction, atmospheric lensing, something technical I didn't understand. But I've been a photographer for 20 years. I know light. This wasn't light doing something unusual. This was the water showing something that hadn't happened yet." Park administration has never issued guidance about the Tarn. It remains unmapped, unnamed, and officially unacknowledged. Rangers who know about it mention it rarely and only to other staff. The informal understanding is that the Tarn exists in a category of phenomena the park does not discuss publicly. A resource manager who worked at Mount Rainier from 2014 to 2018, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the institutional approach. "There are things in the park that don't fit normal explanations. We document them internally, but we don't advertise them. The Tarn is one of those things. Everyone who's seen it knows it's real. But what do you do with that information? Put up a sign? Warning, this lake reflects the future?" The Tarn continues its cycles. Hikers occasionally find it, photograph it, and move on. Most notice nothing unusual. The reflection anomaly does not occur constantly, only sporadically, perhaps a few dozen times per season, based on documented observations. But when it does occur, the pattern holds. The water shows what the sky will be, not what it is. And the correlation remains consistent. 18 to 24 hours, precise enough to be measured, inexplicable enough to be ignored by any institution that would prefer not to investigate. Weather forecasters do not consult the Tarn. Meteorologists do not study it. And the Park Service does not acknowledge that a small body of water at 5,800 feet elevation possesses predictive accuracy that exceeds satellite imagery and atmospheric modeling. The Tarn simply exists, holding its secret in the same way it holds snowmelt quietly, without announcement, available to anyone who finds it but offering no explanation for what it shows. And on certain days, when conditions align in ways no one has successfully predicted, visitors who rest beside the water might glance at its surface and see tomorrow looking back, storm clouds that have not yet formed, stars that have not yet risen, a future reflected in the present, accurate and undeniable. The water knows. It has always known, and it continues to show what is coming, whether anyone believes it or not. Some distress calls come from no one. Ptarmigan Ridge extends northwest from Mount Rainier's northern flank, a narrow spine of volcanic rock and alpine meadow at approximately 6,500 feet elevation. The ridge offers sweeping views of the mountain's northern face and access to remote backcountry areas rarely visited, except by experienced mountaineers and wildlife researchers. The terrain is unforgiving. Steep slopes drop away on both sides. Weather systems arrive with little warning, and the nearest maintained trail lies more than 2 miles distant across difficult ground. The ridge takes its name from the white-tailed ptarmigan, a high-altitude grouse species that changes plumage with the seasons, blending perfectly with rock in summer and snow in winter. The birds are difficult to spot, often revealing themselves only when they move. The comparison to the ridge itself is appropriate. Ptarmigan Ridge hides things well, including the source of 14 separate emergency beacon activations that brought search and rescue teams to the same location over 15 years, finding nothing each time. The first signal was detected on September 11, 1994. The Mount Rainier National Park Rescue Coordination Center received an automated alert from an emergency locator beacon, transmitting on the standard distress frequency of 121.5 MHz. The signal originated from coordinates on Ptarmigan Ridge's western slope, approximately 6,400 feet elevation. Emergency locator beacons are designed to activate only in crisis situations, either manually by someone in distress or automatically through impact sensors that detect sudden deceleration, such as a fall or aircraft crash. Each beacon transmits a unique identification code that allows rescue coordinators to identify the registered owner and the type of emergency. The signal received on September 11th contained no identification code. It transmitted the standard distress frequency, but included no digital data identifying the device or its owner. A rescue team led by Ranger Thomas Gallagher was dispatched immediately. The team reached the coordinates after a 3-hour approach through difficult terrain. They found nothing. No injured hikers. No abandoned equipment. No emergency beacon. The search pattern expanded to cover a quarter-mile radius around the signal origin point. Still nothing. Gallagher's team remained on site for 6 hours, conducting systematic sweeps and checking potential locations where a beacon might have been dropped or concealed. They found no physical evidence of human presence, no footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no equipment fragments. The signal had ceased transmitting 40 minutes after it began. Standard emergency beacon protocol calls for continuous transmission until manually deactivated or until battery exhaustion, which typically takes 24 to 48 hours. The signal's brief duration was unusual, but not unprecedented. Rangers theorized that a hiker had activated a beacon accidentally, then deactivated it upon realizing the mistake, and left the area before rescue teams arrived. The incident was documented and filed. No follow-up investigation occurred. The second signal came from the same coordinates on March 22, 1996. Same frequency, same lack of identification code, same brief transmission duration 43 minutes this time. Ranger Victoria Lundquist led the response. Her team found nothing at the coordinates. The search was complicated by late-season snow, which concealed the ground surface and made detecting equipment or footprints nearly impossible. Lundquist noted in her report that the area showed no signs of recent avalanche activity or wildlife disturbance that might trigger an impact-activated beacon. "We searched thoroughly," Lundquist wrote. "If there was a beacon present, we would have found it. If there was a person in distress, we would have found evidence." The signal was verified by multiple receiving stations, but the source was not. Over the next 13 years, 12 additional signals were detected from the same location. The pattern was consistent: identical coordinates, no identification code, transmission duration between 38 and 51 minutes, no physical evidence at the site. Search teams responded to every signal. Park policy required response to all emergency beacon activations, regardless of previous false alarms. The Ptarmigan Ridge signals became known among rescue personnel as ghost beacons, a term used informally but never included in official reports. A search and rescue coordinator named Marcus DeLuca participated in 7 separate responses to the Ptarmigan Ridge signals between 2002 and 2008. In an interview conducted after his retirement from Park Service, DeLuca described the mounting frustration and unease that developed among rescue teams. "The first few times, you assume equipment malfunction or human error," he said. "Someone tests a beacon, doesn't realize it's transmitting, leaves the area. But after the 5th, 6th, 7th time, same exact location every time, you start wondering what you're missing." DeLuca recalled that rescue teams began bringing increasingly sophisticated detection equipment to the site: metal detectors to locate buried beacons, radio direction finding gear to pinpoint transmission sources, even ground-penetrating radar on one occasion, searching for equipment that might have been buried by rockfall or snow. "We found nothing," DeLuca said. "Every single time, nothing. But the signals kept coming. Real signals, detected by our equipment, verified by multiple stations. Not interference, not atmospheric anomalies. Genuine emergency beacon transmissions from a device that didn't exist." The Federal Aviation Administration, which oversees emergency beacon registration and monitoring, became involved in 2004 after the ninth signal. An FAA investigator named Patricia Sorensen visited Mount Rainier National Park to review incident reports and coordinate with search teams. Sorensen's investigation focused on identifying the beacon's origin. She analyzed the signal characteristics recorded by rescue stations, comparing them to known beacon models and manufacturers. The signal profile matched standard emergency locator beacons used in aviation and backcountry recreation, but the absence of identification codes made it impossible to trace to a specific device. Sorensen interviewed search team members and reviewed search documentation. She found no evidence of equipment malfunction in the receiving stations. The signals were genuine transmissions, not false readings or electronic interference. "What we have," Sorensen wrote in her report, "is a verified distress signal with no apparent source. Either someone is deliberately transmitting false distress calls using an unregistered beacon, which would be a federal crime, or we are detecting signals from a device that cannot be located through conventional search methods." The report recommended continued response to future signals and suggested installing permanent monitoring equipment at the Ptarmigan Ridge location to detect and triangulate any subsequent transmissions. The monitoring equipment was never installed. Budget constraints were cited. The signals continued sporadically. 2005, 2 signals 3 months apart. 2007, 1 signal in August. 2009, 1 signal in October, the 14th and final documented transmission. After October 2009, the signals stopped. No emergency beacon activations have been detected from the Ptarmigan Ridge coordinates in the 15 years since. A wilderness ranger named Jennifer Blackwood participated in the response to the final signal on October 19, 2009. She described the experience in a personal journal entry, later shared with a journalist, researching unexplained park incidents. "We hiked in knowing we wouldn't find anything," Blackwood wrote. "Everyone on the team knew the pattern, but you still have to respond. You still have to search. And standing there at those coordinates, in the exact spot where 14 emergency signals originated over 15 years, you feel something. Not scared, just aware that something happened here that we don't understand." Blackwood noted that the October 2009 signal lasted 41 minutes before ceasing. The transmission stopped at precisely 14:37 hours, 2:37 in the afternoon. Her search team arrived at the coordinates at 15:20 hours, 43 minutes after the signal ended. "The wind had picked up," she wrote. "Cloud cover moving in from the north. We spread out in a standard search pattern. And I kept thinking, what if someone really needed help? What if this time it was real, and we still couldn't find them? No person was found. No equipment was recovered. The signal's origin remained unexplained." National Park Service records contain incident reports for all 14 beacon activations. The reports document search efforts, team compositions, weather conditions, and negative findings. The reports are available through Freedom of Information Act requests, though few people have requested them. A researcher at the University of Washington's Department of Emergency Management, Dr. Harold Pritchard, reviewed the Ptarmigan Ridge incident reports in 2013 as part of a broader study on false alarm patterns in wilderness rescue systems. His analysis confirmed what search teams had long suspected. The signals were genuine, the coordinates were precise, and the absence of any discoverable source was unprecedented in the history of emergency beacon responses. In 15 years of research, Dr. Pritchard wrote, "I have not encountered another case where verified distress signals repeatedly originated from the same location with no identifiable source. The statistical probability of 14 separate equipment malfunctions producing identical results is effectively 0. Dr. Pritchard recommended further investigation, including examination of the site for unusual electromagnetic properties that might generate or reflect beacon signals. His recommendation was not pursued. The Ptarmigan Ridge coordinates remain unmarked. The ridge continues to attract occasional visitors, mountaineers accessing remote routes, researchers studying alpine ecology, photographers seeking isolated vantage points. Most are unaware that the area generated 14 emergency responses over 15 years. Rangers who worked those responses remember. Some have returned to the site during off-duty hikes, standing at the coordinates where the signals originated, searching for something they know they will not find. DeLuca visited the location one final time in 2018, 9 years after the last signal. He brought a handheld radio receiver capable of detecting emergency beacon frequencies. He powered it on at the exact coordinates and waited. Silence. Only the wind moving across the ridge and the distant sound of meltwater running beneath late-season snow. "I don't know what I expected," DeLuca said in his interview. "Maybe closure. Maybe one more signal so we could finally understand what was happening." But there was nothing. Just an empty ridge at 6,400 feet, where someone or something called for help 14 times, and we never found out why. The emergency beacon system continues to operate across Mount Rainier National Park. Rangers respond to distress signals when they occur. Most are genuine emergencies. Some are accidental activations. All are investigated thoroughly, but none have come from Ptarmigan Ridge since 2009. The coordinates that produced 14 verified distress calls over 15 years have been silent for more than a decade. The signals stopped. The searches ended. And somewhere on a wind-scoured ridge where ptarmigan blend into stone and snow, the answer to 14 unanswered calls remains hidden, held by the mountain in the same way it holds every other secret that visitors bring to its slopes and never carry back down. Some forests grow where they were never planted. Burroughs Mountain rises on Mount Rainier's northeastern flank, a broad plateau of alpine tundra and volcanic rock extending above 7,000 feet. The mountain is named after naturalist John Burroughs, who visited Mount Rainier with John Muir in 1896 and described the alpine environment as a land above the trees, where only the hardiest plants dare persist. The tree line on Mount Rainier typically ends between 5,500 and 6,500 feet, depending on slope, aspect, and local microclimate. Above that elevation, conditions become too severe for tree establishment, high winds, short growing seasons, thin soils, and winter temperatures that can drop below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Subalpine fir, one of the dominant tree species in the Pacific Northwest's high-elevation forests, reaches its upper limit around 6,200 feet on Mount Rainier's exposed slopes. Individual Krumholtz specimens, stunted, wind-deformed trees, barely taller than a person, occasionally persist, slightly higher in sheltered locations. But healthy, upright, subalpine fir growing above 7,000 feet should not exist. The species lacks the physiological adaptations necessary for survival at that elevation. Yet, on Burroughs Mountain's southern slope, at approximately 7,200 feet, a cluster of 17 subalpine fir trees has been growing for nearly 4 centuries. The trees were first noted in park records in 1959, when an aerial survey photographer named Walter Garrison captured images of Mount Rainier's alpine zones for the United States Geological Survey. Garrison's photographs showed the expected landscape tundra vegetation, scattered rock outcrops, patches of permanent snow. But one image, frame 73 of Flight Path B, showed something unexpected: a distinct cluster of trees at an elevation well above the normal tree line. Garrison flagged the image as a potential mapping error. The trees appeared too large and too numerous to be Krumholtz outliers. They looked like established forest, out of place in the alpine zone. A field verification team visited the site in August of 1960. The team included a botanist named Dr. Margaret Schultz and 2 USGS surveyors. They confirmed the tree's existence and location. 17 subalpine fir specimens, ranging in height from 12 to 28 feet, growing in a tight cluster on a south-facing slope at 7,200 feet elevation. Dr. Schultz documented the stand's characteristics. The trees appeared healthy, with normal needle coloration and active growth. They showed no signs of the extreme wind deformation typical of crumholds. Their root systems had established in shallow volcanic soil over bedrock. The surrounding area contained typical alpine vegetation, heather, sedges, low-growing wildflowers, but no other trees within 800 vertical feet. Dr. Schultz collected core samples from 3 of the larger specimens to determine their age. Tree ring analysis, conducted at the University of Washington's Forestry Lab, revealed ages of approximately 270, 310, and 380 years. The oldest tree had been growing on Burroughs Mountain since approximately 1640 decades before European contact in the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Schultz's initial assumption was that the site contained unusual microclimate conditions that allowed tree survival at abnormal elevation. She returned in 1961 with meteorological equipment to measure temperature, wind speed, and precipitation. The measurements showed conditions typical of alpine environments at that elevation. Nothing exceptional. Nothing that would explain how subalpine fir could establish and persist for centuries. Soil analysis revealed thin, nutrient-poor volcanic substrate standard for the area, but not conducive to supporting trees above the normal tree line. The site received no unusual protection from wind or cold. The trees simply grew where they should not have been able to grow. Dr. Schultz published a brief paper in 1963, describing the stand as an anomalous high-elevation population, warranting further study. She recommended genetic analysis to determine if the trees possessed unique adaptations. That analysis was not conducted until 2007, when a forest geneticist named Dr. Raymond Kowalski obtained funding to study isolated tree populations in Mount Rainier National Park. Dr. Kowalski collected tissue samples from all 17 trees and compared their genetic profiles to subalpine fir populations from across the Pacific Northwest. The results showed no significant genetic variation. The Burroughs Mountain trees were genetically typical subalpine fir, indistinguishable from populations growing at normal elevations. They possessed no special adaptations for cold tolerance, wind resistance, or high-altitude stress. These trees shouldn't be there, Dr. Kowalski wrote in his research notes. Not just in the sense that they're growing outside their normal range, but that they're doing it without the genetic tools that would make such growth possible. It's like finding a tropical plant thriving in the Arctic, with no modifications to its biology. Dr. Kowalski attempted to determine the stand's origin. How did subalpine fir seeds reach an elevation 800 feet above the nearest seed source? Natural seed dispersal in subalpine fir is limited. Seeds are heavy and fall close to parent trees. Wind can carry seeds short distances, but crossing 800 vertical feet of alpine tundra would require extraordinary circumstances. Dr. Kowalski consulted historical records, looking for human activity that might explain intentional planting. The area showed no evidence of historical habitation or tree planting efforts. The tree's age, dating to the 17th century, predated any European presence in the region. Indigenous oral histories from the Puyallup and Muckleshoot tribes, whose ancestors lived in the shadow of Mount Rainier, contain references to sacred groves in high places. Elders describe areas where trees grew, where the mountain allowed them, marking boundaries between human and spiritual realms. But these accounts do not specifically mention Burroughs Mountain, and tribal representatives were reluctant to discuss the matter with park researchers. Between 2007 and 2024, the Burroughs Mountain stand has been monitored irregularly by park botanists. The trees continue to grow. New seedlings have been observed, 4 young specimens, ranging from 2 to 7 years old, establishing near the original cluster. The seedlings are genetically identical to the adult trees, showing no adaptive mutations. They are growing at 7,200 feet, with the same inexplicable success as their ancestors. A park botanist named Lisa Fernandez, who has studied the stand since 2018, described the seedling establishment as the most troubling aspect of the phenomenon. If these were relict trees, survivors from a different climate period when tree lines were higher, you could explain their presence, even if you couldn't explain their genetics, Fernandez said in a 2022 interview. But new trees are establishing. Seeds are germinating and surviving in conditions that should kill them. The stand is expanding. Fernandez measured growth rates in the young seedlings. They are growing at normal rates for subalpine fir at typical elevations. No stunting, no stress indicators. The trees behave as if they are growing at 6,200 feet, not 7,200. Climate records show no significant warming trend in the area that would explain the expansion. The tree line elsewhere on Mount Rainier has not shifted noticeably in the past 50 years. Only the Burroughs Mountain stand is advancing upslope. Fernandez recommended comprehensive study continuous monitoring, advanced genetic analysis, soil microbiome investigation. Her proposal was reviewed by Park Administration in 2023. Funding was not approved. Budget priorities were cited. Aerial photographs taken regularly since 1959 show the stand's progression. A comparison of images from 1959, 1987, 2004, and 2022 reveals gradual expansion. The original cluster of 17 trees has become a small grove covering approximately 1/4 acre. The tree line is advancing upslope at a rate of roughly 3 feet per decade. At that rate, the grove will reach 7,400 feet by the end of this century. Dr. Schultz, the botanist who first documented the stand in 1960, died in 2016. In her final interview, conducted for an oral history project by the University of Washington, she was asked if she ever determined why the trees existed where they did. "I spent 40 years thinking about those trees," she said. "I collected data, ran tests, consulted with colleagues, and I never found an answer. The trees are there because they're there. That's the only explanation that fits all the evidence. They exist in defiance of what we know about plant physiology and ecology, and they're not just surviving, they're thriving." Hikers who traverse Burroughs Mountain occasionally notice the grove. Most assume it marks the upper limit of the tree line, unaware they are observing an ecological impossibility. A few photograph the trees and post images online, noting their unusual elevation. None suspect the grove's age or the mystery it represents. Rangers who lead interpretive hikes in the area do not mention the anomaly. When asked about the trees, they describe them as an interesting outlier population without elaborating. The grove continues its slow expansion. Seeds fall. Seedlings establish. The forest advances into terrain where forests should not exist, carrying genetics that provide no advantage, growing without explanation in soil that should not support them. And on quiet days, when the wind drops and the alpine tundra falls silent, visitors standing among the trees report a peculiar sensation, not discomfort, not fear, just awareness that something is occurring here that does not follow the rules that govern the rest of the mountain. The trees stand, the seedlings grow, and the forest climbs higher, patient and inexplicable, advancing alone into the alpine zone, while the rest of the tree line remains exactly where it has always been. No one knows why. No one has explained it. And the trees, rooted in impossible ground, continue reaching upward toward the summit, as if they know something about this mountain that the scientists measuring them have never understood. Some visitors to the mountain arrive without bodies. The Ingraham Glacier flows down Mount Rainier's southeastern face, a river of ice descending from the summit crater toward the Cowlitz and Whitman glaciers below. The route crosses technical terrain, steep ice slopes, crevasse fields, and the notorious disappointment cleaver. Climbers attempting the summit via this approach typically establish high camps on the glacier between 10,000 and 11,000 feet, resting in the thin air before making their final push to the crater rim. The glacier has claimed lives. In 1981, an ice avalanche killed 11 climbers near Ingram Flats. In 2014, 6 people died when they fell into a crevasse. The mountain does not forgive mistakes at this elevation, where temperatures drop well below freezing even in summer, and weather systems arrive with minimal warning. But the deaths and the hazards do not fully explain what climbers hear at night when they camp on the Ingram Glacier. The footsteps that circle tents in darkness, methodical and patient, leaving no trace when morning comes. The phenomenon was first documented in expedition logs from 1977. A climbing party, led by a guide named Robert Vasquez, spent 2 nights camped at approximately 10,400 feet on the glacier's upper section. On both nights, between 2 and 3 in the morning, members of the party reported hearing footsteps in the snow outside their tents. Vasquez described the sound in his trip journal as deliberate footfall, like someone walking a perimeter. He noted that the sound circled the camp completely, taking approximately 8 to 10 minutes to make a full circuit. When he called out, asking if anyone was awake and moving around the camp, the footsteps stopped immediately. Vasquez unzipped his tent and looked outside. The glacier was visible in moonlight. He saw no one, no movement. The other tents in his party were sealed, their occupants inside. In the morning, Vasquez and his team examined the snow around their camp. They found only their own tracks' boot prints leading from tents to the designated latrine area and back. No unexplained prints. No evidence of anyone walking circuits around the camp during the night. Vasquez mentioned the incident to a park ranger upon his return. The ranger, a man named Thomas Gallagher, noted the report but did not file formal documentation. Strange sounds on glaciers were not uncommon. Wind, ice movement, thermal contraction, the mountain produced many noises that could be misinterpreted. But the reports continued. In 1983, a solo climber named Patricia Morales camped alone on the Ingraham Glacier during a summit attempt. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, she woke to the sound of footsteps circling her tent. The rhythm was steady, consistent with human walking pace. The crunching sound was distinct boot on consolidated snow, the kind of noise that only occurs with weight and pressure. Morales remained still, listening. The footsteps completed one full circuit, then another. She counted 4 complete circles before the sound stopped. She waited 15 minutes, then opened her tent. The glacier was silent. She could see the surrounding terrain clearly under a bright moon. No one was visible. No other camps were nearby. She had chosen an isolated position away from the main climbing route. At dawn, Morales inspected the area. Her own tracks were visible, leading from her tent to where she had relieved herself before sleeping. No other tracks existed. The snow around her tent was undisturbed, except for the marks she had made herself. Morales reported the experience to climbing partners after her descent. Word spread through the mountaineering community. By the late 1980s, the Ingraham Glacier footsteps had become known among guides and experienced climbers not as legend or superstition, but as a documented experience that multiple credible witnesses had encountered. A climbing ranger named Victor Kowalski, who worked Mount Rainier from 1988 through 2002, heard the footsteps on 3 separate occasions. In an interview conducted after his retirement, Kowalski described the phenomenon with careful precision. "It always happened between 2 and 4 in the morning," he said. "Always when you were camped above 10,000 feet on the Ingram." The sound was unmistakable boot steps in snow, walking slowly, deliberately. It would circle the tent 1 to 4 times, then stop. If you called out or made noise, it stopped immediately. If you stayed quiet, it would continue until it finished whatever pattern it was following. Kowalski emphasized that he and other rangers had considered natural explanations extensively. Thermal contraction of ice, produces sharp cracking sounds, but not rhythmic crunching. Wind can create various noises, but not the specific cadence of human footfall. Rockfall and ice calving are sudden and violent, not steady and measured. I've spent hundreds of nights on glaciers, Kowalski said. I know what ice sounds like. I know what wind sounds like. This was neither. This was the sound of someone walking. When asked why he never investigated further while the footsteps were occurring, Kowalski's answer was simple. Because I was at 10,000 feet in the dark on a glacier full of crevasses. You don't leave your tent at night unless it's an emergency. And this, whatever it was, didn't feel dangerous. Just present. In 2009, a climbing expedition from Oregon State University included a geophysicist named Dr. Angela Ramos. The expedition was focused on measuring glacial movement using portable seismographs. Dr. Ramos installed 3 seismometers at different locations on the Ingram Glacier to record ice flow and microseismic activity. The team camped at 10,200 feet for 3 nights. On the second night, multiple team members reported hearing footsteps circling the camp between 2:15 and 2:43 in the morning. Dr. Ramos was awake when the sounds occurred, having risen to check her equipment. She confirmed the footsteps stopped when she called out, asking if anyone was outside. The following morning, she reviewed data from the seismographs. The instruments had recorded anomalous signals during the time frame when the footsteps were heard. The signals showed rhythmic pressure patterns consistent with footfall regular impacts occurring at intervals of approximately 0.8 to 1.2 seconds, the typical pace of human walking. The patterns lasted for the same duration witnesses reported hearing the sounds. But the seismographs could not determine the source location beyond confirming the impacts occurred somewhere on the glacier surface. Dr. Ramos submitted her data to her department chair, along with witness statements from team members. She requested funding for a follow-up expedition to investigate the phenomenon with more sophisticated equipment. The request was denied. The department chair responded that the seismic signals likely resulted from ice movement or equipment calibration issues, and that further investigation was not a priority for the university's research agenda. Dr. Ramos shared her findings with National Park Service officials, providing copies of the seismograph data and witness accounts. A resource management specialist named Douglas Merritt reviewed the materials and acknowledged their receipt. No park-sponsored investigation followed. Between 2010 and 2024, at least 30 additional reports of the Ingram Glacier footsteps have been documented in climbing trip reports, online forums, and informal conversations with park rangers. The pattern remains consistent. Camps above 10,000 feet, between 2 and 4 in the morning, rhythmic footsteps circling tents, no tracks at dawn. A professional mountain guide named Jennifer Blackwood has heard the footsteps on 5 separate occasions while guiding clients on summit attempts. In a 2022 interview, she described the experience as unnerving but not frightening. My clients would wake up hearing the sounds, Blackwood said. They'd ask what it was. I'd tell them it was probably ice settling or wind, but I knew what it was. Everyone who's spent time on the Ingram knows what it is. We just don't have an explanation. Blackwood noted that the phenomenon never coincided with any harm or danger. Climbers who heard the footsteps completed their summit attempts without incident. The sounds were not precursors to avalanches or crevasse collapses. They were simply present, a consistent, unexplained feature of camping on that particular glacier. Some guides tell their clients about it beforehand, Blackwood said. Some don't. I usually don't, because it sounds absurd. But when it happens, and people ask, I tell them the truth. We don't know what causes it, but it's been reported for decades. The National Park Service has no official position on the Ingraham Glacier footsteps. Internal documentation includes references to unexplained auditory phenomena reported by climbers, but offers no analysis or investigation findings. Requests from researchers to conduct studies have been neither approved nor formally denied. They simply receive no response. A climbing ranger currently working on Mount Rainier, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the institutional approach. We know about it. Everyone who works high camps knows about it. But what would we investigate? We can't see anything. We can't find tracks. We just have climbers reporting sounds that occur in a pattern consistent enough to be real, but inconsistent enough with known phenomena that we can't explain it. The ranger noted that some climbing rangers avoid camping alone on the Ingraham Glacier specifically because of the footsteps. It's not fear, the ranger clarified. It's just uncomfortable. Hearing someone walking around your tent when you know no one is there creates a psychological effect that makes it hard to sleep. And you need sleep at that altitude. The footsteps continue. Every climbing season, teams camp on the Ingraham Glacier. Some hear nothing. Others wake to the sound of steady, patient footfall, circling their tents in the hours when the mountain is darkest and coldest. The sounds follow their pattern. They circle. They stop when acknowledged. They leave no evidence except in the memories of those who hear them, and in seismograph data that confirms pressure was applied to the glacier's surface in rhythms that match human stride. No explanation has emerged that accounts for all the evidence. No natural mechanism produces rhythmic impacts that cease when humans speak. No known phenomenon walks the glacier between 2 and 4 in the morning, night after night, year after year, with such methodical consistency. The climbers who hear it return to lower elevations, complete their descents, and carry the memory of those footsteps with them. Some mention it to friends. Others keep it private. Most eventually wonder if what they heard was real or imagined, despite knowing others have heard the same thing. But the seismographs recorded it. The pattern holds. And somewhere on the Ingraham Glacier, above 10,000 feet, where the air is thin and the ice is ancient, something walks circles around human camps in the darkness before dawn. Not threatening, not malicious, just walking, patient and invisible, as if conducting a survey of its own, marking the presence of visitors to a mountain that has always decided who stays and who leaves.